I'd like to welcome everyone to the May 26th Landmarks Commission meeting. It's great to see everybody, even if it continues to be virtually. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio's open meeting law and section 101.021 of the Codified Ordinance of Cleveland, Ohio, 1976, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commission under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rule of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from any vote due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to taking of any vote. In order to ensure that everyone participating in the meeting has the opportunity to be heard, we ask for you to keep your mic on mute. We then ask you to use the raised hand feature before asking a question or making a comment. The raised hand feature can be found in the participants panel on the desktop and mobile versions and activated by clicking the hand icon. Before you speak, when finished speaking, please lower your hand by clicking on the raised hand icon again and muting your microphone. We will be utilizing the chat feature to communicate with participants. The chat feature can be activated by clicking the chat button located at the bottom of the WebEx screen. Call-in users can unmute by using *6. All meeting activities are being recorded via the WebEx platform. These proceedings are also being live streamed via YouTube. All requests to speak on a particular matter via our website and email have been considered. We have also received emails from those who have provided written comment on a particular matter. We'd like to call the May 26th Landmarks Commission meeting to order. Mr. Pettit, please call roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Ms. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Bonezzi.
Here.
Mr. Brancatelli.
Present.
Mr. Colicchia.
Here.
Mr. Dreyer.
Here.
Mr. Edmond. Director Wong.
Present.
Mr. Strickland.
Here.
Mr. Tarasik.
Here.
Ms. Trott.
Here.
We are also joined today by Kevin Roberts from the Department of Law. Carl Brunges is hosting the meeting. And Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Excellent. We will begin with our certificates of appropriateness. We'd like to welcome the first applicant to unmute their mic, announce themselves, and tell us about their project. The first project is the Bridgeworks project located at 2429 West Superior Viaduct.
Madam Chair, before we begin, I'm going to recuse myself from this particular matter.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ian Kenny. I'm with the Mass Design Group, and I'm joining you from Boston, Massachusetts this morning. Thank you for your time, and we'll jump right into this. We're here to talk about the Bridgeworks proposal here at the corner of Detroit Ave, West 25th, and Superior Viaduct. And I should point out that we're right at the edge of the new 23-acre Irishtown Bend Park, and what we are hoping to achieve here at within the public realm of our project is to open up access on the site to the underbridge and to really kind of leverage the wonderful public amenity that is the new park. There are two existing structures on site. One, yes, I'm sorry.
Before you get started, and this is Steve Jennings with LDA. Just a reminder from the last Landmarks meeting. We presented at the end of the meeting and there was not a quorum. So this is a condensed version of our previous presentation. So this is focused on the demolition of the building, not the full scope of the new construction project. Go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. And yeah, I'll kind of go through this quickly so we can get to the discussion. So there are two existing structures on the site. One is the larger of the two is a administrative office and maintenance garage that we propose to demolish. And the smaller of the two is a historic ticket booth and a sort of head house with a stairway down to the underbridge. And here it is. This is the historic ticket booth, and it's seen better days. But part of our proposal will be to to restore this structure. And just to kind of set the site here, the ticket booth is the structure closest to West 25th in the admin and garage building further back on the site. And what's important to note here is that the garage building and the portion of it which is tightest to the bridge is actually cutting off access from the intersection of West 25th and Detroit Ave from the underbridge access, which is on this image sort of to the right-hand side of the page. You can see as the bridge rises up and that existing parking lot is down at grade, there's an opportunity to get under the bridge, and we hope to kind of open up the site for the public to move through it. And demolishing this building will be part of achieving that. So here it is. We are proposing a mix of affordable housing and hotel programming. There is generous public amenity on the ground plane. We hope to create a publicly accessible plaza and to move the public through the site in a number of different ways, and to really, as much as we can, create a face of the project for folks arriving from any direction that they're coming from. So this being a site with sort of frontages on three sides, it's really important that we create a sort of welcoming face to the project on Detroit, on Superior, and on West 25th. And looking at the Superior Viaduct side of the building, this will be our main ground level entry. The hotel lobby and drop off will be right here. And what we see on the bottom left of the page is the separated freestanding garage. And that is a design that's evolved over the last year. And what we're able to do by separating the garage is actually create a plaza that is fully wrapping around the residential and hotel building in a way that then increases the public's ability to circulate through the site. And here, as we look at the ground plane, the bridge is on the bottom of this page here, and Superior up top. So what we're able to do, and we see the 1939 ticket booth remaining. What we're able to do here by demolishing the garage is to allow the public to circulate from the corner of West 25th and Detroit on a sort of hard and softscape plaza, bringing some of the programming outdoor in the form of cafe seating adjacent to our hotel lobby and coffee bar, and bring people down to that plaza that is to the page right. The bridge access, the underbridge access, I should say, is just beyond a little bump out of the bridge at the bottom right-hand side of the page. And so to be able to move the public through the site and to have people circulate through, again, entering from a number of different directions, and to kind of open it up to all the adjacent neighborhoods here, we thought was a really great opportunity that we want to make the most of. And so we here's some historic images of the neighborhood. On the bottom right, there's just this wonderful kind of iconic view from the Ohio City side of the bridge. And currently it's difficult to access kind of this portion of our site that is immediately adjacent to the bridge. And so one thing that we're able to do is kind of bring this moment back to the public. On the top right, I should also point out that more recently, an event held in the underbridge, a sort of art installation, drew 14,000 people. And to get to this underbridge for the art installation, folks had to kind of traverse the kind of the beat up old parking lot that is now on our site. And so for us to be able to restore the landscape and make it a more welcoming public space is a real opportunity. And this is showing that there's already programming that has occurred here, and there's an ability to really turn this into something special that's already, taking a foothold. And so for us to be able to forward that by, skillfully kind of laying out the site, that's something that we really want to take advantage of. And this is these are all images of the building that we are proposing to demolish. The one thing that I will call some attention to on the bottom center is the face of this building, which is immediately tight to the edge of the bridge. And if we go to the next slide, there is some really interesting detailing on this building, and it is of a kind of deco vintage. And so what we see when we kind of put this all together is that while this building is maybe not historically significant, there is a character to it that we believe we can take some design cues from as we design our building. And so just getting a better look at this at the existing garage as it abuts the bridge. As you can see, there's no way to kind of for the public to get between the building and the edge of the bridge. To the right, there's a kind of half stairway that brings you down to the plaza level. And so we will, by removing this building, we'll be able to navigate the grade, getting from the bridge sidewalk down to our site. And if we go to the next slide, what we'll start to see is that as we study this building, again, like diagrammatically, there's some really interesting things going on. There's some interesting details, and we think that there's a way to take some of the texture and some of the detailing in the limestone that we see here, and kind of use that to inform the design that we'll be proposing. And so as we go to the next slide, hopefully we can see how that is informing part of our design as it's immediately adjacent to the bridge here. So this is a view if you are on the bridge sidewalk and kind of looking down onto the plaza. As you can see now, without the building, or I should say with the building set back from the bridge, we now have pedestrian access all along the edge of the bridge, down to the plaza as it kind of recedes in the background here. And over on the ground floor, this is both looking into the hotel lobby and what we envision as a coffee shop with some spill out seating, hard and softscape landscape. And you'll notice that the detailing of the building is starting to take some cues from the removed garage that we thought were pretty interesting and are a nice way to acknowledge the history of the site. Another view, and we really enjoy this view because as you kind of square yourself up against the bridge, you really see as it starts to recede into the distance, and as you can start to imagine that as a pedestrian, as you walk down this plaza along the edge of the bridge, you're going to start to see views of the skyline beyond and the bridge kind of rising out in front of you. And again, just access to that under bridge, which hopefully will host public programming in the future. And a view of our project from the bridge. And so this is as you are leaving downtown Detroit and coming into Ohio City. We are sort of making carves and massing moves on the building that start to really create some different program moments. I should mention that the 11th floor of the building, and that's where it sort of sets back there, is a restaurant, food and beverage program. And so that will have a 3-season outdoor deck. We hope to really make that a beautiful, active space, greenery, and really maximize the length of the season for outdoor dining up on the 11th floor. And a view from West 25th. We also, I should mention, have a small freestanding retail pavilion out against the West 25th side, and we feel that that's an important programmatic piece because it's going to activate the street front. And again, it's going to be sort of something that, excuse me, it invites folks in, and it's going to be sort of as you're coming from either side of West 25th, it's going to be the street. It's going to represent the street edge, and it's going to be the thing that that activates the site and that feels welcoming to folks before they make their way through the site. and another view of the project, this time, looking down Detroit Ave. The project, we are, doing everything we can to preserve some of the trees on site. There are some really beautiful mature trees along Detroit Ave here closest to us. And we, again, the plan for the landscape is to have a mix of hardscape and softscape so that we can really maximize the diversity of program and the diversity of uses as the public engages with the ground plane. There it is. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you for the presentation. We will begin with feedback from the local committee.
Madam Chair, this was reviewed by the Ohio City Design Review Committee on May 5th. It has not been back to the committee since we saw this 2 weeks ago. They approved the demolition contingent upon studying the reuse of material or replacing sandstone in kind and more attention to the detailing of the triglyphs. Just want to remind the commission that the only action we're taking today is on the demolition.
Thank you for that reminder, Don. I was just going to say the same thing. So then we will move on to questions and comments from the commission. Who would like to start us up? Carl, do you have something that you'd like to say before we start?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to put a little bit more context on this process before we get into this a little bit deeper. This was seen conceptually by the Landmarks Commission 2 weeks ago. And it was at that time that even though it was on as a concept and the Landmarks Commission does not take action but gives direction, the intent of the applicants was to ask for the demolition at that time. However, because we lost the quorum needed to actually take a vote, they couldn't act on that. So we wanted to move this up so they could actually, while it was still fresh in people's minds, so people could look at this again. We sent out the link to the commission so they could refresh themselves with everything that was discussed in whole for this project. Want to make sure that for this demolition, if we're following our code, we're going to be evaluating the architectural and historic significance of the subject building or structure, the significance of the building or structure in contributing to the architectural or historic character of its environs, the present and potential economic viability of the subject building or structure given its physical condition and marketability, and the appropriateness of the new structure or use and its impact on the surrounding community. Hopefully, everybody was able to look at the presentation from last time and this brief one here. This should have enough information to move forward one way or the other on the demolition. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. We'll begin with feedback from Giancarlo.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Just a point of clarification. Looking at this rendering that we have in front of us right now, so this lower facade, exterior facade, will be limestone and not the cast concrete we mentioned at the last meeting?
Yes, we're we heard that feedback, yeah, and I think that is the idea, is that we're going to look at the different materials we can use here. Certainly limestone, we would love to do that, and we think that the detailing could be really beautiful going that direction. Steve, do you have anything to add about the material palette on this area?
Per your request, Giancarlo, we did have a geologist test the stone and confirmed it is limestone.
Yeah.
So we do have that confirmed, as you suspected. And yes, as Ian said, obviously we want to investigate all options, but per the direction from the last meeting, we do want to pursue the limestone as the base material for that.
That's wonderful. So are you also now planning on reusing some of the limestone that will be taken down from the old building?
So we would not intermix the new limestone with existing limestone, just, not to make it, cohesive. We did think, on the ticket booth, we will need to repair some of the limestone. So if we reuse any of that, that would probably be the most appropriate location would be on the ticket booth where we are keeping the existing stone. So, you know, we may be able to
Okay,
reuse some of that.
I'm noticing now that you have some details there, architectural details that match the existing building, which is very nice. And also then, what about the pavers, the paving system? Excuse me. What will the paving at the plaza be? Will that be also stone or cast concrete? Or poured concrete?
I think as we've been developing our landscape, it's a combination of the three. I think we would like to strategically have smaller areas of brick or stone paving, and then, you know, other areas of poured and, you know, potentially stamped concrete for a little bit of texture. But I think it'll be a mixture of those materials.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Other questions and comments from the commission? Mr. Brancatelli?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking forward to this moving forward, and appreciate all the efforts and some of the changes that were made and some of the additional background information that was provided, and would support the demolition when it's appropriate to make that motion with the conditions, as Carl pointed out, on just the documentation that would be needed for the reporting.
Thank you, Mr. Brancatelli. Councilman McCormick. I'm sorry, I didn't notice that you were here earlier.
No worries. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be extremely brief. Appreciate the commission hearing this case today, a really exciting project in Ward 3, and I just wanted to note that I support the local committee's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Pettit, do you have more to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note that we did receive an email this morning from Laura Siraki from Hessler Road, who's concerned that the demolition, if we approve it, not be approved prior to final approval of the new construction and the project. She's concerned that we might lose the building if the project turns out not to happen. So I just wanted to make the commission aware of that.
Thank you. I was just reading that myself. Does the applicant have feedback? What is your intentions with this approval? To move forward with the demolition immediately, or are you just requesting the demolition separate from your approval to get the assurance that the building can come down? Could you give us some feedback on that?
Yeah, I'll let the design team jump in. This is Graham Veazey, one of the owners of it. But yeah, we will not proceed with the actual demolition until we're ready to instigate overall construction on the project. So it'll be in tandem with the excavation, the earth retention system, and the foundation work. So what this allows us to do is you continue down the path in order for us to get to a fall construction start. So there's a lot of moving parts, as this commission understands, having firsthand experience in the architectural and design and construction world.
Thank you for clarifying that. That is helpful. Councilman, did you have additional comments, or did you just accidentally leave your hand up?
My apologies. Hand was left accidentally up.
No worries. No worries. I just didn't want to miss you again. Mr. Bonezzi.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. And one is for Carl. Thank you for bringing up those points about, what to consider when there's a demolition. So I figured, just for the record, we should at least comment on those. So one being the architectural significance. It's one of the few Art Deco buildings. Art Deco kind of missed Cleveland. But to speak to the building itself, like we can all acknowledge it's incurred very, it was hit by a car. So like, I watched that happen down the road. So it's incurred like great, structural integrity loss, and we're still keeping the ticket booth. And I think, you guys are very adamant and aware of maintaining the detailing of the original building to carry forward into the new design. So that's speaking to the architecture of the existing building. And then, the economic vitality of this new construction would, far outweigh, I think, what is currently happening on the corner. So I think all those points connected, I would be in support of what's happening, given the careful attention to detailing that's being considered before the demolition. So I think that would partly be a condition of mine, and to be in support would be the careful documentation for the implementation forward. But otherwise, I'm excited for this project. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Benezzi. Other questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with all the points that have been raised by my fellow commissioners. I would just add a reminder that this project has gone through several design iterations, including several attempts to try to save this building. I participated in the tour of the existing structure, and I agree that it's no longer a viable structure. The south facing the bridge does have some beautiful limestone detailing, but the fact that they'll try to salvage some of that limestone for reuse in the ticket booth is commendable. And I think that this project is going to significantly add to the viability of this corner and the entire neighborhood. So I strongly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. I'll state my feedback at this point too. So it looks like we're not having as many hands up from the commission. I would echo many of the comments that are made. I gave my opinions on the building new design last time. So regarding the demolition, I do appreciate you and commend you for wanting to salvage and or replicate the detailing so that it can be actually appreciated more by the public than the way it is currently, as close as it is to the bridge. And I do appreciate that you're trying to open up the access to the lower bridge to the public, because right now it is not very accessible by many or known. So the more we can celebrate that and make it a known entry, I think it would be excellent. So the more you can do that as you develop the design, by providing some information at the street front, I think would be good, so people understand what you're doing with this project and what you're trying to allow them access to. And then the final comment would be, with this, have you thought about how you connect to the Metro Park trails also? Because especially with the bridge being out the way it has been in the flats, your site is the major access back to the Metro Park trails. So as you finalize your design, just making it bike friendly and pedestrian friendly to connect to the path that is directly across this intersection, I'm sure the public would appreciate it even more. But as stated, that was sort of a meandering comment. I do support the demolition of the current structure with the condition that was, has been stated by the local and by Mr. Benezzi of the careful documentation of the building detailing for replication and or reuse. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you. I have a question. Has there been any initiatives to make that space under the bridge usable for events and accessible by pedestrians? I've been down there and it's cool, but there's like holes in the concrete you can see below, and it's not really in a condition that is that allows it to function. So I was just wondering if there was anything going on with that to change that.
We are in very close contact with Terry Schwartz from the CUDC, who is probably the most comprehensively focused on the underbridge and what the infrastructure is needed. We worked to get a planning grant, but had issues with the prior administration to do that for the underbridge. It's not under our jurisdiction, but I think the evolved site plan that this commission has seen shows how we are orienting the site and the massing in order to make that entry to the underbridge as user-friendly as possible, both from a bike standpoint, but then also pedestrian, but also from a food truck standpoint. We've looked at the dimensions, and if we wanted to do a kind of Walnut Wednesday type of food truck intervention, that again, we don't have jurisdiction on the underbridge, but our site will allow for that sort of access and load in. So very much so is the short answer, Ms. Anderson, but we're excited about that activation and look forward to working with the necessary public entities to see that vision into a reality.
The underbridge space jurisdiction is between, sorry, this is Marika Shuity-Clark, one of the other owners. The jurisdiction is between the city of Cleveland for day-to-day maintenance and the Ohio Department of Transportation for longer-term maintenance. ODOT has been under there over the last several months doing some repair work to repair some leaking and other things like that. So I think they have been kind of actively trying to upgrade the basic safety of the space, but ultimately it would be something that we would be, advocates for as property owners of the public access on the Ohio City side, but it would be something that would need to be probably a longer term public process between the city, ODOT, and or possibly the county, who's also been somewhat involved.
Yes, thank you. I do realize it's going to be probably the state or the county or the city that's going to need to appropriate the funds to make that happen.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Commissioner Wong?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'll keep my remarks brief because I'm eager to get towards a vote, but I'm strongly supportive of this project. For all the reasons named, believe it will bring additional economic vitality to this corner, and I appreciate the absorption of the comments to reuse and utilize the limestone. To the point about the bridge, there are some challenges with regards to creating a throughway, but underneath. But the city, is ready to work and to explore that further, especially with Irishtown Bend Park across the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wong. Other questions or comments from the commission? Would someone like to put forward a motion? Mr. Brancatelli? Mr. Brancatelli, you might be muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, I would motion to approve the demolition with the conditions as noted for documentation.
And
I will second that.
so we have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Yes. Should part of the motion be that the demolition take place when the financing and the approvals are all in place for the project?
You are recommending adding that as a condition?
I would leave that to the property owners just because my experience of holding on to vacant and abandoned buildings and the timing, it can be rather challenging if you're looking at doing salvaging and looking at trying to save some of the stone for the ticket booth and for maybe elements within the project. So there's a lot of resources in this project. I'm not fearful that this project is not going to move forward and then we're going to have a demolition with nothing to show for it. I'd rather leave it to the developer to be able to have the flexibility to time the demolition as needed for the project. So I don't want to add that as a caveat.
Isn't that standard procedure that the new building would have to be approved before demolition is approved, or am I not correct? that assumption?
Brenda or Don, do you want to clarify?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I would say that's generally our policy, Giancarlo. We do make exceptions based on condition and circumstances, and so it's not a hard and fast rule. We have lost buildings in spite of the fact that we required, signed leases and final approval of buildings. So there's no guarantee. But it's always our preference to have a new construction approved and have that approval in hand before we actually sign off on a demolition permit.
So how far are we from the final presentation for the new building?
Would the applicant like to answer that?
Yeah, Steve Jennings from LDA can quarterback in the timeline for us.
Yeah, we intend on coming back in July for the final presentation. And the initial construction, demolition is planned for October of this year.
Okay, so then they can wait until we have a final approval.
Can I just weigh in here for a second, though? I think that part of, from an ownership perspective, is that the approval of the demolition allows us to confidently move forward with developing the drawings for this project. So as you all know, there's quite a bit of drawing to be done with design, development, construction drawings. So I think that Steve weigh in here, but I feel like it would be okay to wait for the actual demolition before the for the drawings to be approved, but to wait for the demolition approval for the rest of the concept, I think would just potentially delay us more.
Is the demolition scheduled already or is it still pending?
Right. So right now it would be planned for October of this year.
The demolition itself.
So I think what we're all trying to allude to is and I think this is where you're going, Giancarlo, I'll just state it out loud, is that, if that condition is added to the motion, that just trying to keep us moving forward here, it shouldn't stop your development. If you're not planning to do the demolition till October and you're going to be back here in July, I don't think that would limit you as a developer to move forward. So if, Mr. Brancatelli or Giancarlo, if you'd like to add that as a condition, it shouldn't impede anything on this development. Does ownership, by your nodding, you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the question that I thought was posed to me was about the financing, not about the design.
Yeah, I think that's the tricky verbiage on that, just because of how complicated that is. So, we will in tandem commence construction, which will include the demolition, which will mean that we'll have to have approval on the overall building. So we're not going to demo the building before we have full CD sets and approval from the city to move forward. So I think we're all saying the same thing, but just talking past each other. And I think the actual word of financing is a pretty loaded word that I would just agree with Tony and say, let's just not have that word, but have the commencement of demolition be aligned with the commencement of overall construction of what you guys are seeing in concept now and what will come back to you in July.
Yeah, and I would be happy to amend, Madam Chair, to include that the construction plans to be approved and design approved. I just did not want to have the financing caveat as part of that.
Okay, so you'd like to add the condition of demolition cannot occur until complete approvals are received from the city.
Correct.
Okay, Giancarlo, do you agree with adding that condition?
Yes, I second that.
Okay, excellent. So we have two conditions that have been stated with the motion related to the demolition of the one building or the buildings. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, could you please call roll and announce the results?
For the record, Mr. Tarasic is recusing himself. Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchia,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes unanimously with one recusal.
Excellent. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you back here with the final design for the building.
Thank
To
you.
the commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our second applicant, the new construction of a single-family house. Before we begin, Mr. Bonezzi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Before we start this project, I just need to recuse myself from this one.
Thank you, Mr. Bonezzi. We'd like to welcome the applicant. Please open your mic, announce yourself, and tell us about your project.
Good morning. My name is David Bowen. I'm with Bowen Construction Services, and I'm happy to present this. I guess this is the third time I'm in front of you. The Providente House in Little Italy. It's on 123rd Street. You can see the site in front of you on the screen. Next slide, please. This shows you the house that was taken down before and the location of the house, but it's been demolished and the foundation stones have been stored in the backyard. Next slide, please. This shows you the new footprint of the new structure. As we talked about before, we changed the hand of the project itself, so the pedestrian entry to the house is on the left side instead of the right side. And we did that because the upstairs balcony off the bedroom had a better view. What we did was we took up a drone and we took it up at the height and showed Christy what it would look like from both sides. And she agreed with, when we went through design review, that we take a look at both, flipping it. So we did flip it as what was suggested at design review. This is basically in the same position as the house that we tore down. One thing you can note is that the common living spaces with the kitchen and the dining room and the bedrooms are have that relief between the two structures next door, which are very large. This shows you the first and second floor. This has stayed basically the same from what you've seen before. Next slide, please. This is a close-up of the first floor. We've kept the garage in the same place. Design review, there were 2 dissenting votes because of the garage being in the front. We looked at doing it somewhere else, but because of program and because of impervious area, we thought for the ecology and for the use of the person occupying the space, this was the best solution. And as we talked before, the garage door is totally concealed and will be flush with the rest of the house. Next slide, please. This shows both balconies, the one in the front, which is gracious and gives you a lot of ability to be on the outside of the house by the front sidewalk and to enjoy the street. And then also the solitude of the back patio or balcony and the back patios in the lush green space below. Next slide, please. This gives you the elevations. One of the comments that was brought up, there's a couple of comments. One was exposing more of the glazing. And what we did, and we took the cues from Landmarks, was we lowered the railing of the balcony and then just a steel railing on top of it like we did with the back that exposes more of the glazing. It also enabled us to, as you have the sheath wrapping down by the entranceway, to pull that back away from the front door and the glazing in the front door, next to the front door. Next slide, please. this was a slide we used before, and it just talks about the fronts of buildings. And so I'm not going to go through that one again with you. Next slide, please. So these are the materials. I also brought examples of it, which design review was in person. So I brought these to Little Italy with me. This is the charred wood. This isn't done in the field. This is actually factory produced. So it's more uniform than trying to do it in the field. Then here we have the yellow cedar. This is the sample itself. You know, and as you can tell, it looks a little more gray than the picture. Pictures never come out exactly right. And then we've made a change from hardy board to this Borel, and here it is finished with the right color. And there were a couple of reasons. One, getting the hardy board of that color was, we weren't assured that we could even get it at this point because of production. And the Borel is actually a more durable material. It's 70% recycled. It's a poly ash composite. And it works, you know, in the field just like wood. I would use the same tools and everything, and it's a really great product. So we've changed out what you see on there as hardy to the Borel product. And then for the slats by the front entryway, we have this rough sawn cedar, you know, and then this has an angle with one smooth end and one rough end, I think, kind of pulls away from the charred cedar and gives it some excitement. Then you can also see we have a black standing seam roof. We have black aluminum wrapped windows with wood interiors, and then the sconces, and there's 2 of them on the front of the building. The rest of the lights are concealed. Next slide, please. This gives you, you can see the railing in front, how we've thinned down the sheath and exposed more of the glazing. As suggested, we looked at 2 other things that we did not do. One is putting the clear story above. That's actually in an attic space that doesn't work with the program. So it would just be a window that would either be a fake window or a window that didn't have use to it. We also kept the detailing, the simplicity of the detailing at the roof line. And we did that because the minimalist style of the building, we wanted to keep from an execution side in constructing the building. It's much more difficult because, as they say, simple isn't always easy. So those joints have to be very tight, and we have to do those things right to give that real simple, elegant line to the structure itself. The one thing that I forgot to point out in the materials is we're reusing the foundation stone in the landscaping. It's going to be in this front patio, which is also doubles as a drive. One of the comments was taking a look at a river birch out front, giving it some height, which we agree with. I don't know if you can see my river birch in the backyard, but it's a beautiful tree, and I thought that was a great comment. And so we gave a lot of height and color to the front of the house and to the back of the house. I think I told you guys last time, Christy has 2 dogs and she enjoys those. Those are her companions. So we wanted to make great accommodations for them. Next slide, please. This is the other angle. You can see with the house set back a little bit, it gives some of the living space in the back of the house some more relief. One thing you don't notice on both sides, there is almost no impervious area. I mean, it's all impervious area, very little green space. So this will be a nice little oasis between these 2 structures. Next slide, please. This is another shot of the front. Next slide. And now this is the back of the house and the patios and balcony and the landscaping. Next slide, please. Night shot. So as you can see, there's two sconces that I showed you in an earlier slide. The rest of the lighting is concealed. It's LED concealed lights. Next slide, please. So this is the landscape plan. I think we talked about it before, but we obviously changed that to some river birches and some trees of substance, and then some boxwoods, and it'll be a landscape that is of the area, but it's also going to be a landscape that doesn't need a lot of maintenance, because I personally know what it's like to take care of your gardens. As some of you walk by my house as I'm weeding. So next slide, please. And then this is the lighting plan. Next slide. So, Don, I think you're going to go through design reviews comments.
That's correct. Madam Chair, if we're ready for that. Ray Christosic couldn't attend the meeting today. He did send a report this morning. The Little Italy Design Review Committee approved the project with some concerns over the front-loaded garage and the double-wide driveway. I don't have the vote totals, but the applicant has testified that there were 2 dissenting voters.
And 5-4. It was 5-2.
Thank you. So it was approved.
Thank you, Don, for that summary. Then we will move on to questions and comments from the commission. Who would like to start us off? Who would like to start us off from the commission? Mr. Edmond?
Thank you. I think there are a lot of challenges in getting the parking and the drive and everything situated on this site and this location. And I think the applicants have done a really good job of tying those things together in a way that's elegant and appropriate, and also modern. And I understand the conceptual objection to having a garage door on the street, but I think this is done very well. The way that it's set back, the way that it provides that kind of garden space in front, which I think of as a very Little Italy kind of thing, and the way that the materials are treated is quite successful. So I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond. Giancarlo?
Yes, thank you. I agree with Mr. Edmonds' comments. I think, and I also like the revised porch. I think we need an outdoor look for the Italian community, and I like the design and the changes that have been made. So I'm in approval and agreement.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Director Wong?
Thank you. I agree with the other folks. I support this, and I really appreciate the use of the impervious drive, which doubles as that front patio. I think that having more uses than just asphalt for cars is good. And I also appreciate the landscaping treatments. And because it's a modern building, it's set back slightly. It's not loud. It fits. It's gentle, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wong. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would have preferred if the applicant would have incorporated a few more of our suggestions, but that said, overall, I like the project. I'm going to agree with my fellow commissioners with their comments. I really like the landscaping, the impervious pavement. I think it's a great look. And I have 3 dogs myself, so I understand the need for some space in the backyard to enjoy, you know, the company of the dogs and for everybody to get outdoors. So I do approve of this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. I'll just echo what has been said. I agree with much has been said. I think the strongest thing is that I like that it's a very understated modern building, so, and not overstated, so that it's not, you know, it's allows it to fit into the context fairly well. And that you've taken some of the cues for the, you know, the gabled roof and so forth, so that it also, once again, is fits in nicely with the adjacent neighborhood. Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question has to do with zoning. And it looks like this covers much of the site in terms of side setbacks. I wondered if any side setback variances will be required, and that if it would be appropriate for Landmarks to issue a letter of support in support of those variances if they are required.
Thank you for your question. So I've put it into Rick Riccardi a couple of days ago, so we can get a full read on the zoning. Because obviously going in front of BOZA takes some time, and there's a 2-week notice period, and they have a pretty full agenda. So right now, we think we're fine with lot coverage and everything. Having the garage door on the front, we may need a variance for. But we're verifying everything with Rick Riccardi right now. So we've submitted it for that zoning approval.
So you're unsure of what variances yet? You're just anticipating the front load garage. It will be your one variance?
Yeah, right now, that's what we think it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I think this is a very handsome project. It fits well within the neighborhood, even, you know, having a modern design flair. And so any assistance that we can give in terms of a letter of support in regard to any potential variances, I'd be in favor of.
All right. Well, I would suggest that we state that when we put a motion forward, which I think we're almost ready to. Mr. Brunges, you had a comments before we do that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the garage door is in the front 50% of the property, so that will require a variance. And I believe the air conditioning on the side yard has been a common one that would also need. Just another comment that's been raised before. This does not need a tree preservation plan due to what's being presented. However, there was a mature tree in the back portion of the property. I was wondering if that was going to be retained as a part of this, or is that going to be removed?
Yeah, it's on the landscape plan. We are retaining it.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. All right. With that, are there any other questions or comments, or someone like to put forward a motion?
I move for approval.
All right. Any conditions?
I can't think of any now.
I'd like to make a condition that we support, the Landmarks Commission support any variances required for the building of this structure.
I agree with that.
All right, excellent. So we have a motion, Giancarlo, with the recommendation of and support of any variances. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. A motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Brunges, you have your hand up. Is there something we should review before we move forward with the vote?
Nope, I blanked out there, sorry.
Okay. Trying to keep making sure I'm getting everybody. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bonezzi has recused himself. Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchio,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with one recusal.
Excellent.
very much. And I just want to say this process has been great. I think the house is going to be a better house because of the process. I appreciated everyone's comments, even though we might not have taken them all, but it's a better structure because of it. But thank you very much and have a wonderful long holiday weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our third applicant, located at Woodhill, or the Woodhill Development Site, located at 1885 Coltman Road and 1862 East 123rd Street. I'd like to welcome the applicant. Please, you're welcome to unmute your mic, announce yourself, and tell us about your project. But before we do that, Mr. Pettit, you have a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind the commission that we approved this project almost a year ago on May 27th of 2021. They're returning today with the final design of the landscaping, the sculpture park, and the signs for the apartment building. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that reminder.
Hi, Julie. Thank you. Brandon Klein with Geist Companies. Brad Nosen, one of the developers, partners on the project, I believe is on the call as well. Just to kind of reiterate what Don had mentioned, the final landscape plan was included in the approval in May. What we're clarifying on, excuse me, is the sculptural park landscaping, detailing, and some outdoor furniture, and then the signage for the building. So as you can see on the landscape plan here, the upper left corner off of East 123rd is our final location for the landscape. I'm sorry, the sculptural park with some pathways, and I'll get into some details here. But mixed materials of mulch, some small rock and landscaping, and then there's a presentation in here we included just for awareness. I believe any actual installation of the sculptural park that's being commissioned right now and working through with select artists with the Sculptural Center will come at a future date. We're just demarking, I'll call it landing locations for that artwork, but along with outdoor seating in some of those areas as well. Next slide. So as you look to zoom into the sculptural park, we kind of have a meandering path that connects you from East 123rd to Coltman Road. In that area, there's multiple locations for future artwork that'll come forth, but along there's a couple of, I'll say it, artistic and decorative and bold outdoor pieces of furniture that'll be placed, along that pathway for the public of that space. And you can see the one bench, the riptide bench to the left, and then the riptide chair down in the bottom. Next slide. Jumping over to the dog park area, there's an outdoor seating location that we're utilizing this kind of more clamshell looked statement. It's in an orange and silver look, again, trying to create a little bit of a bold, eye-catching opportunity, allowing for public to kind of gather outside the dog park area. You can see kind of with the gravel demarcation is the location of that dog park. Again, the dog park was included in the final presentation previously, but we're just coming back with the outdoor seating of those locations. Next slide. And then this part of the presentation is just kind of for awareness for the commission to understand what will be presented and finalized from the Sculptural Center's efforts, but some locations and types of art that will be scattered throughout these spaces. Next slide. So this key plan will relatively show where some of those locations are along the building and scattered throughout, and it'll be highlighted in the next few slides. Next slide. So sites A and B, these are just some examples of type of sculpturals that are being thought through or discussed. Most of the sculptures are very colorful. Again, that presentation will forthcome to this commission, but just to try to give a sense of scale and size and location of where those will be planted. Next slide. In the center area, basically between that meandering path, there's an idea of potentially creating kind of an artistic fountain with some sculptural elements kind of integrated within. Next slide. There's some discussion about creating some larger sculptures within this as well. Again, 3x3, 4x4 areas along the pathway. Next slide. Some of the larger context that could happen. Next slide. Some of the playful aspects that could come along that same area. This is in that center space of C. I think there's also another slide next that would be center C that was a little bit more interactive for kids and people. This installation could be run overhead over the path and create kind of a nice wind chime-esque type feel or aspect. Next slide. This could be another use of space. These are kind of small mini tables that can turn into almost a playground for the kids in that area. Maybe a little bit smaller scale than this, but these are the things that are being contemplated by the Sculpture Park. Next slide. There's 2 wall murals that are going to be commissioned by University Circle to basically beautify the backdrops of their facades. Currently, they're relatively in rough shape, mostly masonry. It's being discussed whether it be a vinyl that could be peeled off and adjusted, you know, or taken down and redone, or physically painted. I think the next slide has an example of one of those painted backdrops. So these are 2 locations in Cleveland. We've emphasized that the development team and University Circle really like the beautifully destroyed version that was done. Cleveland area mural. Next slide. And then on the backdrop in the center section of that pathway, the idea of, again, this amenity wall, if you will, can be interactive for kids and for people along that path. This would be adhered or fastened to backdrop of University Circle's building. So again, a very interactive sculpture park along that pathway connecting East 123rd and Colton. Again, these are not representations of what the final installation will be. We're just trying to earmark locations for where these potentials could be. And I guess really kind of close out, I'll say the construction aspect of this portion of the project, while the Sculpture Institute works with their commissioned artists to put together an actual sculptural package for your guys' review in the future. Next slide. And then lastly would be the signage of the apartment building. We took into a large process of going through and looking at, I'll call it Italian typologies of fonts. What we felt we came away with was kind of a modern Italian look, but also has a little bit of a classic throwback. The name of the project is going to be branded the Monroe. East 123rd in the early 1900s was Monroe Street, and playing homage to the history of Monroe Street is the apartment branding. Color palette is on the right. Next slide. So we have 2 signage locations. One demarks more of I'll call it the vehicular access to the drive off of East 123rd. So this is directly adjacent to the edge of the building. There'd be a post-mounted sign about 4 foot by 3 foot, demarking the logo, and would again demark kind of the vehicular entrance to the site and access to the site. And then next slide. And then we have a canopy mounted sign over the canopy proposed for the project that would demark the pedestrian entrance way off of East 123rd. Both are internally illuminated signs with acrylic faces. I think that's the last slide. Oh, here's the overall. So to give you kind of the overall size and scale, you know, of the entryway, there's a vehicular drive that connects from East 123rd to Colton through the townhomes on both sides. with the signage kind of for the apartment building demarcating the entrance to the parking lot area. Here's another view from closer to Euclid, looking back at the two signs. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. We'll begin with feedback from the local committee. Don, are you covering this also?
I am, thank you. This was reviewed by the Little Italy Design Review Committee, and both aspects of the project, the Sculpture Park and the signage, were approved as presented.
Excellent. Thank you for that summary. We'll then open up the floor to the commission for questions and comments. Who would like to start us off? I'll begin with mine and then up. I just saw Mr. Strickland's hand go up. I do appreciate the development of the landscape park and the approach that you are taking to this, trying to provide a variety of different opportunities within it. I look forward to seeing you coming back with the final sculptures, but I do like how you've incorporated more sculptural seating within the area. In the time until those are installed. I also, the signs are very appropriate to the area, in my opinion, and I support both. Mr. Strickland, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the whimsical design and colors selected for the various seating and sculptural elements. I think it's going to add to the vibrancy of the development of the whole project. I noted that some of the concrete bases for some of the structures were identified as 12 inches deep. Some of the sculptures look fairly large. Just want to make sure that there's an appropriate engineering of those foundation bases for the larger sculptural structures. And I heard Brandon say that the sign was a post-mounted sign, and it looks like a wall-mounted blade sign to me, and I just wanted clarification on that. But
I meant kind of cantilever post, but yes, blade would be probably more appropriate terminology.
Thank you for that clarification. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strickland. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I really appreciate the signage. I think it's very elegant. I think it's very appropriate to the building. And as a real estate agent, I truly appreciate good signage, so I know I'm in the right place. And I just want a clarification on the sculpture garden. In reading and based on your presentation, will the sculptures be changing? Will they, be there for a certain amount of time and then something else comes in? That's kind of the way it sounded. So if you could clarify that.
Potentially, the sculpture center is going to be kind of monitoring, running, and handling this aspect. We're kind of handing this land and area over to them to commission and kind of swap out as they feel appropriate. The land or the development team has kind of full review rights over that aspect, and then obviously any of the changes that occur through there would, I believe, and Don and Carl, please correct me if I'm wrong, but would be subject to resubmission and review of this commission.
Brandon, I apologize. This is Brad Nosett from the development team, and in our discussions with the Sculpture Center and Director Chin there, I believe the intention is that these are semi-permanent exhibitions which will rotate every so often or frequently. I think the idea, and if that is feasible, And hopefully it is, because the idea is that you can kind of have rotating exhibitions for people to come visit and have another reason to come down to the Sculpture Park to see the new installations. And then, I would assume that the intention there is every time we have a new sort of grouping of sculptures, and this may be once a year. I think it all is kind of budgetary constraints, but we would then come back to landmarks and get those necessary approvals, if that makes sense.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Giancarlo?
I'm curious, what is the affiliation between the development and the Sculpture Center?
Merely a partnership. When we were, we submitted an RFP for the site, and when it was owned by University Circle Incorporated to develop it. And one of the ideas that we had is that we could work with the Sculpture Center to help them. The development could earmark some land to provide a sculpture garden, and then the Sculpture Center would be able to curate, if they were interested in doing so, the various sculptures that would be on site. And then, we could attempt to help them with sort of fundraising efforts if necessary, to use that as an outdoor gallery, if that makes sense.
So yeah, so the space could be or will be in an exhibition space for some sculpture shows, and so there'll be a continuous engagement from the Sculpture Center with the project.
Correct.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I think initially, we proposed kind of providing a 5-year license for their use, and there would be no reason, not to continue that into perpetuity. So that it effectively becomes an outdoor, gallery for them.
No, I think it's a great idea. I think it keeps the whole space living into the future and changing and transforming. And
Yeah, the other aspect that we really wanted to integrate in this meandering path was that there was a lot of through interest groups and discussions with residents and other aspects. There's a lot of desire to have that as a cut through, to be able to get from East 123rd to the Coltman side of through the site. We felt it was a way that we could connect the two streets in a kind of an enhanced setting, and not just have a sidewalk connection. That there's the meandering path through to be able to make that cut through, so you're not cutting just through a parking lot.
very good, thank you.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Other questions or comments from the commission? Would someone like to put forward a motion?
I move that we approve the project as presented.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Mr. Edmond?
I'd second that.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchia,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmond,
Yes.
Director Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasic,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion to approve passes unanimously.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, Commission. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We'll move on to our next applicant, the Ukrainian Museum and Archives located at 1202 Kenilworth Avenue. I'd like to welcome the applicant. Feel free to unmute your mic and announce yourself and tell us about your project.
Madam
Good
Chair.
morning, Madam Chair. This is Myron Pakush. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. Commission members, good morning. My name is Myron Pakush. I'm a volunteer with the Ukrainian Museum Archives. I believe on the line also, we should have our architect with the Ukrainian Museum, Paul Burley. can I ask if Paul Burley can hear us, and can he comment that he can hear us? Well, maybe, I'm not sure if he's muted or not, but I'll attempt to present without Paul. Maybe he's having trouble with his microphone. So the Ukraine Museum of Archives have been in Tremont for many, many years, and we attempt to do improvements as we can. We're here before you today to present we want to do an expansion to the front porch of our museum, and then add an ADA compliant ramp along the west side of the building. As part of this project, we're also going to replace the rotted wooden boards along the south side of the house and the east side of the house with hardy board or cement board, I believe is what we call it, to match the other two sides of the house that have already been completed. The east side and the north side have already been replaced. I believe Don has in your material packet photos of the existing house along with our conceptual architectural drawings prepared by Paul. Don, can you confirm that the members have that?
Yes, we have the existing condition photos. We also have the set of drawings that Mr. Burley submitted. It's unfortunate that you can't see the visuals, but we're scrolling through the existing now.
Yes. Madam Chair, can you hear me? Hello. Yeah, we can hear you, Paul.
I was muted. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble getting the speaker set right.
Well, we can hear you. If you'd like to continue on about the project, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I don't know which drawings you have, the first submittal or a revised submittal. Our first submittal did not have the handrails on our ADA ramp shown correctly. We updated that to have a metal handrail which has a 42-inch guardrail and an integrated 34-inch high handrail. So that has been upgraded, but basically the expansion of the southwest porch, which is approximately about 6 feet to the west, basically what it does is it hides the ramp so the ramp is not offensive or too dramatic from the street elevation. So basically we copied the design of the porch exactly. We are going to be replacing materials on a porch, the spindles, the banisters, because number one, they were replaced at some time in the future after 1907, and they do not comply with what was available in 1907, so we know they're incorrect. Also, with the front entrance door has been replaced. You can tell that because the hinges are in a different place from what the existing details show. So what we're going to be doing is upgrading that front entrance so that it matches maybe more closely to what it would have been in 1907. Yes, we finished painting and replacing. Actually, it was a multi-thing that we did. Why we're replacing the siding is because there's a lot of warp siding, it's porous, and because the museum put in a blown-in loose insulation into the walls back 15 years ago, I don't know if that was properly done, and I have a concern that we have a moisture barrier or moisture problem behind the siding, which is coming through and peeling off the paint within 5-6 years after we put professionally applied paint in the proper specifications that are required, and it peels like a banana. It's just terrible. So the hardy board, before putting that on, we are putting on a vapor barrier, then the hardy board, and this, I think, will minimize any dew point that might be created on a backside of the siding, so that we will protect it that way. Anyways, the main request is with the addition of the porch and the ADA ramp, which we are proposing. If you have any questions on that, I would be happy to answer them. Hello?
Yes, we're still here. Just we're
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I wasn't sure.
does that conclude your presentation? We're still on. Carl is advancing your slides right now so that we can understand the full design. Was that your completion?
Yes, on the slides, does it show the handrail with just the 5-foot spacing of posts on a ramp?
Yes.
Okay, because we have 3/4 inch steel square pickets at 4 inches on center that go between the posts, which are 5 foot on center. They're 1.5 inch diameter.
Okay. And Carl, do we have is this the most up-to-date presentation you have? I'm assuming.
Actually, I had updated drawings, color schemes, and pictures of the existing and the new paint that was put on. But I don't know, what I can do is I can have that scanned this morning and have it emailed to you so that you have the complete set of the latest up-to-date information.
Madam Chair, this is the most latest up-to-date version that was sent to Don.
Okay, so I think we're looking at it. Also, are you on phone only, or are you also able to see the screen?
I can't see the screen. I'm only on phone. I couldn't get it on my computer. My
No
Apple
worries.
won't accept.
No
I'm
worries.
sorry, go ahead, Madam Chair.
It looks like Mr. Brunges is showing your color schemes on the screen right now, and your
Okay.
elevations and ramp design.
Okay, then you have the updated.
Okay, excellent.
Do you also have the photographs?
Of the existing building?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Brunges started with that so that we could become familiar with the building.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Those are right. Anything else with your presentation, or did you just conclude your presentation? I don't want to move ahead.
I think we can conclude our presentation unless you have questions or discussions.
Okay, well then we will move on to feedback from the local design review, and then we will move on to the commission's questions.
Thank you.
Do we have feedback from the local committee?
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair. This is Michelle Davis with Tremont West Development Corporation. The local committee met at the Ukraine Museum and approved everything that they have proposed here today. They did have reservations though about justice of the presentation, but they want to paint the railings and all of the columns on the front.
Losing your audio.
Michelle, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if that was my feedback. There is reservations on the committee's concern about painting the railings and the columns of white color. They would prefer them to use something in the proposed color palette that was shown earlier. But I know Paul and Myron had proposed to the committee using a white. So that was the only thing that the local committee had issue with, but they liked everything else. So.
All right, thank you for that feedback and that summary. We'll open up the floor to the commission for questions and comments. Do you have questions or comments from the commission? Mr. Brent Catelli?
Thank you. If I could just a quick question for Paul or Myron. Was there any follow-up on Michelle's comment about not using white or using something from the palette that was presented?
Yes, Paul Burley here. Why I chose the white color for the columns, the banisters, and the spindles on the porch only is to accentuate the entrance. My concern was that I used a blend of colors, as you can see on the new elevations that of the west and north that was painted. The colors all are meant to blend into each other and to soften the elevation up. And my concern is that this blending would come down the porch and it would blend the porch into the house and it would be kind of mute. So the white color is so close to the white trim color, it's an off-white actually, that I just wanted to make the entrance stand out a little bit. And it is a white color that does not really hit you in the face. All it does is it accentuates the entry. So that was my design feeling on how to handle that, because it just seemed like it would be wishy-washy, but that's my opinion.
All right, thank you. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I live in Tremont and I go by this house, this museum often, and I really enjoy the color palette that they've used on the house. But I wondered if those colors have any history behind them, if any investigation had been done either through photographs or trying to excavate through several years of paint to find out what the original color scheme may have been. And if the original materials are available, I would like to know what the process was to develop the color scheme, and if the porch itself could mimic what historically would have been the colors used when the house was originally constructed.
Madam Chair? Paul
Yes,
Burley
sir.
here. Yes, what I did do is I researched and got the color charts from Sherwin-Williams from 1907, and we chose the colors from that palette. To really, I mean, we try to investigate and find out, to really identify what color went on, it was near impossible. And so what we did is we went with a palette, and we went with lighter shades. Previously, the museum we had was dark and dingy, and it didn't look alive to the community. It was embarrassing and to me as an architect, and me being also on the board of trustees with the museum. So we picked light colors that would lighten up the neighborhood, and we have gotten dozens of comments from the apartment next door to us for the wonderful colors that they could look at now instead of what was there before. But it was picked from the 1907 color chart of Sherwin-Williams.
For your investigation, you were not able to determine what the original porch colors and the railings and banisters would have been?
Absolutely not. Although it seems to me from historical background, and I've done some restorations, residential and commercial, like, I did the restoration of the post office behind Tower City back in 1988. And so I'm used to investigating and trying to comply with whatever materials we know about, but they never listed colors on any drawings at all. And besides that, drawings are totally unavailable for that era. So it's looking at existing homes that are preserved that we got the best feel for what the porch should look like. And it appears that most of the porches had white banisters, spindles, and columns, and trim quite a bit. Yes.
All right. Thank you for that response.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Strickland. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you. Regarding the front door, you mentioned that you will be replacing that door, and I don't recall seeing any renderings or photos of the replacement door, and I was wondering a little bit about the design of it and the materials.
The door will match, the door and the glass will match the existing door, front door as it is. What we're going to have is the same thickness material and all that, the same design, and but it's all going to be insulated glass and upgraded for security with locks and reinforcement. So that's it. The appearance as you see it on the elevation of the drawing is how it's going to be, which is how it actually is.
So it'll be fabricated from wood?
Yes, solid wood.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. Edmund?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the white color for the railings and so forth, I think white is not inappropriate. And I understand about making it sort of pop and giving it some dimension against the background colors. And the color palette you have, I think, feels very, very appropriate. But I think the selection of the white is going to be really important to making that work. I think if it's a cold, bright white, it's going to feel incongruous and ahistorical. I think if it's something a little bit richer, a little bit warmer, not necessarily quite to an ivory, but like a West Highland white kind of a color, if you're looking at Sherwin-Williams colors, I think that the exact selection of that white is going to be really important to making that porch work the way you're hoping it will.
I agree with you 100%, and it would not be a bright white.
Is the white we're talking about the nutmeg frost that is on the screen that's labeled trim?
The hold on one second, please. White match banister. The nutmeg frost is really the trim color on the building, and it would be just lighter than that, but have a hue, that would pick that up or would complement that.
Mr. Edmund, did you have any?
Yeah, so if you look at the, thank you, Madam Chair. If you look at the photograph looking from the west side, you can see that nutmeg frost on the trim. And when it was up on our screen here just a minute ago, it looks whiter than I think it really is, and than it looks on my other screen. Yeah, so here you can see that's the nutmeg frost on the trim, and you can, it's really not as white as it looked in that other image, and it really is, I think, very integral to that palette, just to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, I hear you.
Mr. Bonazzi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with what Mr. Edmond is saying about choosing a white. I painted a house this weekend and we had 7 2x2 squares of white painted trying to pick a white, which is much harder than you think it would be. So, which is actually something you might want to do, which is to create like 2x2 MDF just painted whites and kind of take them on site to kind of really dial in which white you choose, because it's going to be a very nuanced kind of decision to make. But I wouldn't disagree with the palette. I think, as we've all said, it's very appropriate to kind of what you're doing. It's just,
Thank you.
white is nuanced, and I think you know that, as we all do.
Absolutely, and I agree 100%.
A great color is just to add to everyone's repertoire of colors is Snowbound by Benjamin Moore. It's very nice creamy white color. Might also want to look at that. Keep that in your repertoire.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonazzi. I think enough has been said, or much has been said on the white. I would just challenge you if you need that additional white, and looking into it, as Mr. Bonazzi said, on site with the colors, you might realize the nutmeg is a fairly light accent color and might, keep the simplicity of the house. My personal opinion.
Okay.
I know Victorians are 5 colored. You already have 4. Usually that 5th color is just the slight accent pops that are used, versus a large scale, application of it. So, just something to think about. I would personally feel that your nutmeg may be appropriate for the porch, but I think looking at it on site and then informing staff what your final selection, we would need that color submitted to us regardless for the porch, if that's not determined right now, so that you could come back to staff with your final decision, and work with staff to finalize the color of the porch.
Very good.
All right, other questions or comments from the commission? There's no feedback that was given on the ramp. I think previously, trying to blend the design with the pickets, if it works with the front porch, if simpler is better. Did we talk about the color you were going to paint that pipe rail with the pickets?
A good question. I haven't really picked it. I don't want black because that just doesn't tie into anything in a house. And I was thinking an off-white, or it could be the trim color that we have on a house, so it blends with the house. Because you don't want it really to pop, that's just there. It's a necessity, and you want to minimize the impact on the visual, I think.
We would agree having a blend in with or I would personally agree having a blend in with the house would be our recommendation, and using the colors that are already there minimizes the attention to that ramp. It is a necessity. You are a public facility, so I think people understand it, but blending with the architecture would be my personal recommendation. So
done.
Make the condition that you submit that also to staff, also for whomever makes the motion here in the near future.
Well, very good. Consider it done.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we've talked about everything. It was the porch renovation, siding, and then access ramp. I don't have any issues personally with the hardy board replacement, and appreciate that you're using a higher scale material than vinyl with this replacement.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the commission, or would someone like to put forward a motion? Mr. Brancatelli?
Yes, I would approve as presented, and then just finalize on the white, whatever color white they choose, working with the commission. I mean, working
So
with
it's
the
a
staff.
condition to return or to submit to staff the final porch color and railing color of the ramp on to staff review and approval.
Yes, thank you.
Madam
Yes.
Chair,
If you
Madam
don't mind
Chair,
holding,
I,
we have a motion.
could I make a quick comment?
Let us finish the motion and then there'll be a point for additional.
It's on the motion that I wanted to say, why don't we just go with the frost to match the trim and be done with it? It's not out of, it's not, it seems like the logical way to go. Why don't we do that?
Okay, if that is and you would like to move forward with that, frost for the porch rails and the porch itself and the railings of the ramp, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying the direction you'd like to go, Mr. Brancatelli.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Madam Chair.
That's okay. Mr. Brancatelli.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to hear from the other commission members on their opinion on that.
Works for me.
Madam Chair, with the motion on the floor, you have to have a second first. You can change it after that.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Carl.
Madam Chair, I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Now we're on to further discussion. So Mr. Brancatelli has asked the commission if we support in the color that the owner had just put forward. Mr. Edmond, would you like to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, since I commented on the white, I'll just say that I'm also okay with the nutmeg frost.
Oh, we have a little bit of background noise. Do you mind repeating that?
Yes, since I commented on the white, I just wanted to say I'm also okay with the nutmeg frost.
Excellent, thank you. Any other feedback from the commission?
This is Bob Strickland. I agree with that color selection.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. Anyone else? All right, then Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify that we have a motion to approve with the nutmeg frost to be the color for the porch rails and the ramp rails. Is that correct? Thank you. Ms. Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Bonezzi.
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli.
Yes.
Mr. Colicchia. Mr. Dryer.
Yes.
Mr. Edmond.
Yes.
Yes. Director Long. Mr. Strickland.
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik.
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Congratulations. We look forward to seeing your projects move forward and your completion of the upgrades to the exterior.
Thank you very much,
Myron
Madam Chair.
Pakuch. Thank you, commission members and Madam Chair.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you
also.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That concludes our certificates of appropriateness. We'll move on to concept plan reviews. Just a reminder for the commission that we'll be reviewing and providing comments only. We'll not be moving forward with a vote on any of these applicants or these cases. We'll begin with our first applicant under the concept plans, which is the new construction of the residential tower and structured parking located at 1200 West 76th Street.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Adam Comer with J-Rock Development. Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate you hearing us out this morning. I also have Mr. Bill Naburka and John Spencer with Evident Architecture Office online here, who will be going through some of the details of the project. I just wanted to kind of quickly jump on, introduce myself, and give a little bit of background on the existing Shoreway building. So the existing building that we are looking to building addition 2 was built in 1918, and it was originally home to the Globe Machine and Stamping Company. Prior to the conversion into luxury loft apartments, which is its current use, the building was used as a warehouse for Pat Catan's. And that conversion into luxury apartments was completed with first tenants moving in the year of 2014. So I want to introduce Mr. Bill Naburka now to sort of walk through our presentation, and we look forward to your feedback.
Good morning, everybody. So again, this is the sort of concept review, and we can move through this pretty quickly and just be available for any questions, as I'm sure you guys have. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Just showing the location of the existing Shoreway building and the location of the project. The Shoreway building exists between West 76th and West 78th. It's addressed on West 76th. You can see on the left slide that the Edgewater Beach is almost directly north of the project with the park. The project actually abuts the railway right-of-way, and then obviously the Shoreway highway just across from that. Next slide, please. The current configuration of the site is the Shoreway building is the L-shaped structure there on the right. There's a portion, the triangular portion there is a one-story covered parking area. It's currently used for parking. And then the rest of the site is surface parking right now. Next slide, please. So the approach of the project is obviously we want to create this addition to the Shoreway building with the historic structure. How do we do that? Our approach is to create a freestanding addition, which is indicated by the dark purple there on the left, and then knit the two together with a podium of new structured parking to basically provide the parking that's required for the site. The little rectangular slot down at the bottom of the Shoreway building, the L-shaped Shoreway building, is an existing one-story covered, I guess it would be called a causeway. It was covered in, I believe, 1956. It was roofed between the Shoreway building and the Tamura building just to the south. And we're looking at that as a potential new connector and a unifier for all of the structures. So creating a complex of sort of like-scaled buildings. Next slide, please. So conceptually, obviously with the separate structures, it was how to begin to knit these two together. This just shows a basic massing of our approach. And the existing on the lower left is just the circulation. The existing elevator core for the Shoreway building is on the left, and the new elevator core for the new building would be on the right. The structured parking, kind of knitting the two together, actually concealed from any street view, but knitting the two together on the north side. And then again, using that sort of existing historic one-story covered causeway as sort of a new internal street to connect the structures together. Next slide, please. Going through the neighborhood landmarks group, we wanted to insert some views. So you're going to start to see some views of the massing. Again, we understand this is still sort of a conceptual review, but we wanted to sort of test the massing and get some viewpoints from various spots around the site. They're a little abstract, and I think, take this as a measure of we're trying to show what you can see, not necessarily obscure the structure in any way. So in some ways, they almost kind of jump out at you a little bit. This is a view down from the parking lot at the Shoreway Beach, or the Edgewater Beach, pardon me. Next slide, please. So the approach to the facade, again, it's how do we begin to knit these two together? We took the approach of creating a very pragmatic skin to this building, trying to look at the Shoreway, large glass, very pragmatic approach to these industrial buildings. How do we create a complementary structure while not necessarily mimicking the existing structure? Next slide, please. The scale of the project does exist within the neighborhood. The Westinghouse complex there on the left is probably something we've been looking at, is how do we knit some various scale buildings together, a residential building and another warehouse building, and all about the same scale height that we're looking at. Just below is some quick study models. We've been studying this, how these kind of go together, they shape, so that we're not really obstructing any of the views from the existing building, and how do we start to make these complementary to one another. Next slide, please. Again, some views from around, very conceptual views around the building, just showing how we would adapt that very pragmatic approach. Our sense of how to create a modern building that creates a complex with historic structures is to basically use that idea of the older industrial buildings where they really are, they have a very pragmatic approach, and ornamentation, embellishment is really through detail, necessarily more than kind of superfluous ornamentation. We're looking at some shaping to the top of the building, again, to mimic a more historic roof line, but also allow the building to lighten as it goes up. Next slide, please. The materials we're looking at on the right, Shoreway is pretty much a brick-clad concrete building with large factory glass. We are looking at, again, we're trying to create a natural material and not necessarily making that direct reference to Shoreway with the brick, the masonry, but looking at something else. What we're looking at right now is actually a weathered steel panel. That would be, it's a kind of a one-off system, a rain screen panel, but we would be looking at something that has a bit of texture and a bit of nuance to it that could still be used in a very simple way, a very pragmatic way. So the weathered steel on the left, a very simple glass system, either curtain wall or a unitized system. And then basically where some infill occurs with louvers and so forth at the enclosed garage at the base, probably a complementary painted metal that would match the window frames. Next slide, please. So the plans themselves, I can roll through these pretty quickly. Again, the ground floor, we would be adapting back into parking, using it primarily from parking. The new parking structure, actually, as it is entered now, is off West 78th Street. West 78th was abandoned. Adam, you may know the exact date, but I think it was in the 60s. That right-of-way still exists to the surface parking lot. We would continue to use that for the new structured parking. The lower gray area left is that sort of covered causeway that we would look at using as a common lobby interior street that we think would have a lot of character, and then we could begin to address the buildings in one central location. Next slide, please. The second floor, this is kind of an intermediate floor because the first floor of the Shoreway is so tall. It's kind of a mezzanine floor, would have another level of parking. Next slide, please. And then currently we're looking at a third level just to get our numbers to where we would like them, a third level of parking. And then you can start to see in the middle of the two buildings, looking at an amenity deck that would be a central amenity for both structures, for all residents. And we're actually looking at a swimming pool that would front the lake. Next slide, please. The typical elevated floor of the new addition would be 12 units, 12 larger units. Smaller units against the south side, and then larger units obviously against the lake. Next slide, please. Again, in an effort to begin to just look at how the building represents from outside the project, this is looking down Father Frascati, and we kind of picked a view where you could really see the building. And I think, foreshortening aside and visual effects, we tried to make it as clear as possible, the limit to which you would see the new structure. Next slide, please. Just some view of how we're starting to look at the exterior. we imagine that as the building elevates, we're looking at larger units up on the top. We haven't really determined the final configuration, but those larger units would start to have some exterior decks, some exterior terraces, and how the building could begin to lighten and dissolve as it meets the skyline. The lower is a view from the Shoreway Drive. Those trees in front, we tried to kind of at least make it as apparent as possible where the building sits in relation to that. Next slide, please. And then a view down 78th. Again, 78th is abandoned about, I think about where that electric pole is. There's sort of a current cut through that's used by many of the existing residents over through parking lots to 76th. But this would be looking down and the entrance to the parking of the new structure, actually of the complex. Next slide, please. One of the questions that came up was sort of the shadow effect of this building. We did actually do shadow studies to kind of test whether a swimming pool would be viable kind of at 3 times in the year. I think this is relatively self-explanatory. The shadows seem very manageable, and especially during the warmer months seem to be suitable, at least from our view, as far as getting a pool on the amenity deck. Next slide, please. The following pages are just in your package are just our current schematic elevations, just showing the amount of glazing and opaque wall surface, the area of the garage down at the base, and its relationship to the Shoreway structure. Next slide, please. We don't need to spend too much time on these. Next slide, please. The building section, the way we are actually nestling in this is sort of cut through the Shoreway building. So this is looking at that sort of lower 2-story podium of parking and how it relates to the existing structure. We wanted to obviously keep that down below the 2nd floor window line, which is the current configuration of residential units on the north and west side of the Shoreway building. And then that top of that would form that amenity deck. Next slide, please. This is just a section of the structure as it sits. You can see that within the addition portion, we would have 1 more level of parking, and we are looking at capping this at or below the 115 feet that's allowed by our zoning. I think that might be it. Maybe there's 1 more. That might be it. So I think what we can do is, and Adam, unless I missed something that you want to chime in, we can just open it up for questions. And
No, I think you covered everything, and we look forward to answering some of your questions and taking some of your feedback.
Excellent. Thank you for the presentation. We will begin with feedback from the local design review committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was reviewed by the Gordon Square Clifton West Local Design Review Committee on May 11th. There's some discussion about the uniqueness of the roof line and that it had seemed to float a little bit out there. They discussed parking, that the parking is more than 1-to-1 for this project. They'd like to see some more views from the different locations and pedestrian sight lines. They want to see what the visual impacts on the Shoreway building and the powerhouse were. They requested solar studies, a migratory bird study, and a stormwater quality study. They asked if there could be possible landscaping to buffer the garage. They asked to keep looking at the scale and the massing and the shadows that were cast on the existing building, which they have done here. They asked to look at the materials and how it relates to the building and the battery park as a whole, as they need to speak to each other, to possibly look at a brick podium, and asked if the height could be supported. The Shoreway did receive historic tax credits as a part of the renovation, but we are outside of the 5-year look back period. Some other stuff that was discussed was the zoning. This is on the edge of the form-based code pilot area, and the current zoning allows for 115 feet, and there would be no difference between the current code and the form-based code for height. There were some issues that were brought up in discussions with the sewer line that runs underneath, and maybe in a minute they can discuss a little bit more about that. They still need a stormwater plan and a determination letter, a traffic study on how this is going to impact with the increase coming up West 78th, and a tree preservation plan, even though it doesn't look like there's much currently, and if it's not applicable, but they should probably have a look at that. I will also add that there was a zoning review done for the property, and there are two that were noted by Mr. Riccardi. 355.04 in a B area district. Maximum gross floor area is limited to 1/2 the lot area. 27,634 maximum gross area is permitted. 161,312 dwelling unit floor area is proposed. And then 357.08 in a use district other than a residence district, the depth of a required rear yard in connection with a building of residential occupancy shall not be less than 1/2 the height of the main building. Approximate 57-foot rear yard is required. None is provided. We have Adam Davenport from City Planning who could add any additional comment to that, and then I'll send it over to Mr. Pettit with some community feedback. Thank you.
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to give us your feedback?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Adam Davenport from City Planning. Carl highlighted the two variances that this project will need if it moves forward. The classic floor area ratio variance, which almost every new house in the city of Cleveland or on the near west side receives, speaks to the lot area in relation to the livable space area. And then the rear yard was also highlighted by Carl. That speaks to more single family houses needing requiring a rear yard so it doesn't take up the entire lot area. Since this is on the same parcel as the Shoreway parcel, this new project being the same parcel as the Shoreway building, that's why the rear yard was highlighted as well. Speaking to the broader zoning context, this is zoned the same height area as Battery Park and a lot of the industrial area to the west of kind of north of Lake Avenue, south of the Shoreway, in the kind of the general industry, semi-industry area over there. It is right on the edge of the form-based code pilot as well. And the height district wouldn't change, so the same height district would be applicable here. Happy to give any other comments and viewpoints from the city planning aspect if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Don, do you have additional feedback from community letters?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We received 3 letters this morning from 3 members of the community. All of these letters have been shared with the commission. I do think it's important to note them in the record. We received 2 separate letters from Abby L. DeMaio and William DeMaio, who live at 1253 West 76th Street. Ms. DeMaio was concerned about the proposed height, the mass of the building. There's a concern that if this project is allowed to build at 10 stories, that it opens the doors up to other additional 10-story projects in the neighborhood. Battery Park and the Legacy neighborhood are predominantly single-family homes and 3-story townhomes. We will be dwarfed by one or more 10-story structures, and the iconic character of the Battery Park Powerhouse Tower will be eliminated. A 10-story tower looming over the Shoreway, Edgewater Park, and every other structure in this community is just not appropriate. A building commensurate with the height of their existing structure would not so completely change the landscape of this community. Mr. DeMaio was also concerned about the height. There's a concern about parking. There's a feeling that the parking produces adverse effects on local businesses. There's also some concern about how the owners of the Shoreway use the neighbors' lawns and tree lawns for pet relief. There's also a concern about delivery trucks using West 76th Street, generating unwanted noise that should be relocated to West 78th Street. And his recommendations are that we reduce the building height, reduce the number of residential units, provide more publicly accessible grass-covered areas for pets, require that all residents use on-site parking, and that more deliveries be diverted to West 78th Street. The third letter today came from Rachel Hronick, who lives at 7311 Father Frascati Drive. She was concerned that the project would alter the skyline of the neighborhood, that the 10-story structure is not right for the community. She's also concerned about setting a precedent for other 10-story structures in the neighborhood. She's also concerned that the structure would nullify the designation you already approved and was voted into legislation earlier this year for the powerhouse. While we understand that development is necessary, we ask that the committee be mindful of the density, size of structures, and impact these structures in total are having on our neighborhood. We were unfortunately unable to respect their request to attend the meeting today. We just got the request this morning, so but I did think it was important to add all their comments into the record. Thank you very much.
Apologize, I keep on talking with my mute button on. Carl, did you have something additional to add in before we move on to commission feedback?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I believe there was some technical difficulty in emails, and we had requested additional comments, and there may be additional comments, and if we get them, we will share them as well. Since we are not taking action, it is something we can take into account later on. We will share all these with the applicants as well. So I had responded to an email, but for some reason mine went into everybody's spam folders. So we are expecting to have more feedback on this project, but I think right now what we have is what's in there. And then I believe we also have a representative from Councilwoman Spencer's office in attendance as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Then I will ask for the feedback from Councilman Spencer's office, and then we'll move on to commission feedback.
Good morning. Thank you very much. The council office is actually not prepared to make a statement this morning regarding this project.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know that. We will then move on to commission and open the floor to the commission for questions and comments. Who would like to start us off? Mr. Brancatelli.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of quick clarifying points. One of the questions that got raised was around parking. And if we can clarify, they're providing more parking spaces than required.
That was stated. Would the applicant like to confirm that?
That's correct. Yes, we're well over one-to-one parking with our current design.
Thank you. Mr. Brancatelli, other questions? Did we just lose him? Mr. Brancatelli? All right, looks like he, or maybe I'm having technical difficulty because I can't see him or hear him.
Sorry about that. I'm on rectum cable and it goes out every once in a while. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So, okay, so the parking well over. And I appreciate the slide on the impact on shadowing and what the impact will be on the neighborhood. I think that answers some of those questions. And certainly when it was mentioned earlier around the roof lines, those are really, I really do like the roof lines, and the massing makes a lot of sense at this location, given what's going on in the community. That's I think a good addition to the vibrancy of that area. One of the other questions, I know this is a common problem when you start getting to this density, they mentioned around pets. Can the applicant again speak a little bit on how they're going to help manage a lot of these tenants who have pets and how they might be able to provide for that?
I can speak to that briefly. Many of our tenants, the current tenants of the Shoreway building, certainly do have pets. And they do, of course, it's a great community and a great area for that. So of course they're walking their dogs and pets throughout the community. We certainly have taken that feedback, and while we are in a conceptual stage in designing still, we'll do our best to work in some additional areas where tenants of the building could take their pets to avoid any impact on residents in the area.
I think what I would add to it is, I know we have discussed as a team the extent of the amenity space, that kind of common amenity space will be on top of the parking. There is sort of ample space to create pet relief areas. And I do know that, we have discussed the importance of that as the sort of building community. There's a lot of dog owners.
Okay, thank you. And just in full disclosure, my sister lived in the Shoreway building, and my terrier was an overnight guest a few times. So I do realize how that occurs. So I think being a clarifying point for the residents out there would make sense. The other point, just to clarify, this does meet the current code in terms of height restrictions and massing for the most part.
Correct.
Okay. And then there was a note around traffic study. Was there some consideration around what the impact might be on looking at additional traffic, or how it might relate to what else is going on within that community?
That will be something we look at. Obviously, we will commission the studies as required. This is an incremental addition of parking compared to the surface parking and existing structure parking. We do take that very seriously, both for the convenience of the residents, but also the impact on the neighborhood. And I do know that we were talking about how we can service the building off of 78th versus 76th, both, again, for the impact on the neighbors, but also the convenience of the residents. So I think this is sort of ongoing. This sort of analysis is ongoing.
Great, thank you. I do this is a wonderful addition, in my opinion, to the skyline there and to the vibrancy of our market. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brancatelli. Mr. Bonazzi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have about 3 things to ask. The first being, all parking is going to be served off of West 78th Street, if I'm reading your plan correctly. Yes, okay. I just wanted to address the neighborhood's concern of, an increase of, street traffic on 76th Street, but it looks like the way you guys are approaching it, it would force everyone to kind of go into the back to be on 78th. The second part that I wanted to acknowledge is I do like, the very Miesian approach to the building. And also the deconstructed frame when you reach the top kind of parapet part, right? It lets the building kind of dissolve into the air. One thing I do push you to look at is the resolution of some of the angles of when you are slicing that frame out. There's just like 1 or 2 pieces where I noticed of like hyper thin slivers, and just the resolution of making sure that kind of those details are actually applicable as you move forward in your design process.
Sure. We're just trying to make contractors uncomfortable at the moment. That's our main goal.
I know the feeling. That's everything I design makes people uncomfortable. But no, and the only other part that I'd push you to look at is kind of the proportions of the openings that you're creating right now. They're the warehouse is usually typically a very kind of like 1 to like 1.5 ratio. It's wider than it is tall, and the ratio of your squares is coming out more square. I think that could help you relate formally to like I know it has a lot to do with column placements and kind of floor to floor heights is how you get those proportions. But I think maybe dialing that in a little bit closer to the formal relationship of the warehouse building next to you, even though materially you're taking a very modern contemporary approach, it could help kind of tie the two together. I think it's something that could be studied, but I can't argue that it is a very handsome minimalist building. That it does feel very warehousey. So I commend you for taking that sort of like clean, easy an approach to this project. And I look forward as you kind of resolve these details and bring some higher fidelity to the project. So that's going to be my only comment for now. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Venezzi. Mr. Strickland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I commend the architect and the developer. I think that the proposed design of the building addition integrates effectively with the historic nature of the existing structure. I do have a question about just in terms of sequence and construction. How will you accommodate parking for the existing tenants within the Shoreway building during construction?
I'll make a comment there. We do have some land down West 78th Street. Certainly safety and comfortability of existing tenants is paramount for us. So prior to construction, we would of course have a very clear plan that we would communicate to them in the community. But we do have some land along 78th that we could potentially look at some options for parking during construction, and that's something that we are still studying.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that consideration of accommodation of the existing tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strickland. I will read Mr. Edmonds' comments, I believe, that are in the chat, just so that they're part of the record, that unfortunately he had to leave, but he thinks the height massing is not a problem. He likes to deconstruct the treatment of the top stories. However, he thinks the whole thing would be more palatable to the context if a brick facade was used instead of the mill steel cladding. I have to tend to agree with either the local committee comments or Mr. Edmonds that in either a podium of brick with the additional, clad steel, mill steel cladding above, or in investigating brick might allow it to blend more into the context. Regarding the density in this location, I am not against the density because it is not in the center of the neighborhood. It is on the skirt of, the edge of the northern edge of the neighborhood. So the height, I should say, related to the density is not as much of an issue as if this was further south to me personally. I know there are other buildings in the area with the height, but I personally don't think that's always appropriate where they've been placed. One thing I didn't hear you mention, and maybe I didn't just focus in on it. What is your plans for the roof of this? Do you plan on putting a roof deck here for your residents?
So currently what we were doing was creating an outdoor amenity space actually at the roof of the garage so that we could, I think one of the desires of the development group is to have a swimming pool available to everybody.
I saw that. What about the tower itself?
So the very top right now, we're looking at residential units, which would have a combination of outdoor space. They feel like that's sort of where the market for the building is. And it also allows to, within this larger complex to create discrete communities so that the Shoreway sort of has its security for its residents. This new addition has the security for its residents. but there's a common area that's at that lower level that everybody can participate in.
I know the amenity deck on the roof of the Shoreway is popular, amenities and attracts many to that building. But do understand if you're providing dedicated, outdoor space versus, common outdoor space on the roof. I think as you develop the design, that is something that I think could help with the massing by bringing that down some, because of the views of the lake are so predominant here. But just something to keep in consideration. I do agree with Mr. Benezzi's comments, just the proportions. In spirit, I know you are trying to relate to the warehouse context, but the proportions of your windows do fight it a little bit, and doesn't allow it to blend in as well as I think you would like it to. Just as you resolve the design, you're looking at that to see if it would make sense to adjust the proportions some. The simplicity is beautiful, and as Mr. Bonezzi said, just trying to be honest about the how it relates to the context is always great to continue to look at.
Sure.
And then the access off of 78th Street, I think makes sense and just really encouraging that and reinforcing that is something that, as you complete the design, would be good to resolve for like deliveries and so forth, because I don't see a loading zone. It seems like you're using every aspect of your podium for parking dedicated to parking itself versus a delivery zone.
Yeah, speaking to I know that the stormwater or the sewer pipe running underneath the site, we're looking at options for that. There may be a bit more of a setback on the south and west to accommodate a relocation. And those areas, will again lend themselves to adding loading areas and so forth. We would need to provide an easement, but we could still pave those areas if we needed to.
So those could be your dedicated move-in zones and so forth, correct?
Correct.
For both things.
Correct. Because they would then have access to the west end of that sort of causeway that connects all the buildings. So that might be a nicer place to park a truck than, obviously we want to keep it off of 76th because it's so congested right down there.
Absolutely. I think those are all my comments at this time. Other questions or comments from the commission? Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think development of this site is a good thing. It's a wonderful area, beautiful views. People are, have easy access to all the great things in Gordon Square. I like the fact that you are mimicking the, general grid window configuration of the surrounding warehouse type buildings. I do agree with Mr. Benezzi and Ms. Trott's comments about the dimensions of the windows, if they could be more horizontal. And I also agree with Mr. Edmonds that, incorporate more brick. I find the size and the scale, I'm uncomfortable with that. I think it's too large. I think it overwhelms the other buildings in the area. And that's something I just can't embrace. I'm also not comfortable with the unresolved nature of the top of the building. When I first looked at the drawings, I thought, well, it looks like, something got cut off here. I don't know, it just doesn't work for me, especially in relation to the other buildings in the area. I have a couple of questions. I want to say I'm happy that you have the additional parking. I think, a lot of tenants in these buildings are couples and they each have vehicles. And these days with electric vehicles, I wanted to ask if there will be an abundance of EV charger stations in the building.
I can comment. So that's something that we've been very thoughtful with on some recent projects. So we would explore. We have added EV chargers on recent projects, and we would explore adding them here as well. Certainly.
Yeah, I think that's the direction people are going. More and more people I know are getting electric vehicles, and I'm sure I'm headed in that direction as well. You know, I think it would be helpful to have a little bit of green space for, people to, walk their dogs or, go out and have a smoke or something. Hopefully that can somehow be incorporated into the design. I think it would make a lot of sense. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Other questions or comments from the commission? Right, does the applicant, since this is a conceptual review only, do you feel like does the applicant feel like you received enough feedback from the commission to continue the development of your design?
I do. Speaking for the design team, I do.
Certainly, yeah, and we absolutely, and we appreciate this feedback. This is helpful as we continue forward.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, then we look forward to seeing you come back to see us in the future with your final design.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the commission.
We'll move on to our next conceptual review, which is, oh, no more. Sorry, I'm looking at the agenda on my side screen. We'll move on to landmark. That concludes our conceptual design reviews. We'll move on to landmark nominations. First one located at 11901 Union Avenue. I'm not going to try the name right now because I am struggling with, and we'll move on to the presentation. Carl?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll introduce Margaret Lamb from Cleveland Restoration Society, who has provided us all this information, and turn it over to her.
Thank you, Carl. Madam Chair, members of the commission, thank you for hearing this nomination today for Second Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. Joining me today are pastors Cedric Eichelberger, and I believe Pastor Nash is with us, and then trustees Stephanie Johnson and Tracy Johnson. So Second Tabernacle reached out to Cleveland Restoration Society expressing their desire to be designated as a local landmark. So we were happy to work with the church on developing this nomination. And the church has also engaged with our Sacred Landmarks Committee as they're moving forward with some plans for repair, maintenance, and property improvements. Carl, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. So this building was constructed in 1922 for the Neve Zedek Lithuanian congregation, and I may be pronouncing that wrong. And at the time, that congregation was the largest in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Next slide, please. And here is a historic plat map showing the position of the building within the neighborhood. Mount Pleasant was rapidly growing as a Jewish enclave. There was about 24,000 residents at the time that this was constructed. Glenville was also growing as the Jewish population migrated out of the Central and Woodland neighborhoods. Glenville was known as the upper middle class residents for the Jewish population, whereas Mount Pleasant was attracting a lot of blue collar and tradespeople, and many of these ethnic populations were retaining their Orthodox heritage, as Nevi Zedek did. Next slide. And just for a little bit of neighborhood current context, you can see that a lot of the historic fabric that had existed in the earlier map has been lost. But Second Tabernacle obviously remains as an anchor at the corner there of East 119th and Union. Next slide, please. The building was designed by Polish immigrant architect Mayer Altschold. Altschold was quite prolific in designing a number of apartment buildings and commercial buildings between 1914 and 1951. Also designed a couple of other synagogues and the Jewish bathhouse on Morrison Avenue. And pictured here are two of the remaining structures that still stand today. Next slide, please. Like many of the Jewish congregations, Nevi Zedek continued its migration eastward in 1957 when it merged with another Orthodox congregation and moved to Cleveland Heights. So at this point, the building was then sold to Second Tabernacle Baptist. Their congregation started in Cleveland in 1939 and was located in the Kinsman neighborhood prior to their purchase of this structure. As many of us know, due to redlining and systemic racist practices, the African-American population lived alongside Cleveland's Jewish population in many of the neighborhoods. And as the Jewish population migrated eastward, that was an opportunity for the Black population to purchase these buildings and make them their own. And this is a pattern that we see here and throughout the city. Next slide, please. So just 2 years after moving into the building, the church had already paid off half its mortgage on the building and began to implement improvements and remodeling changes to the structure. Documented remodeling that occurred in the 1970s is listed here on this slide. And many of the exterior features you can see remain today. This is a current photo. So portico over the front, the awnings on the side, the addition of an ADA ramp, and the change in the windows over the front entrances. There was a Star of David stained glass that was removed, and the glass block crosses were put in place. Next slide, please. On the interior, the sanctuary still reflects its origins as a synagogue. There's pew seating on the main level, and then there was gallery seating that surrounds the sanctuary on 3 sides at the 2nd floor. The church has removed the pews from the gallery to allow for some more flexible seating options in that 2nd level. Next slide, please. Additional changes to the structure that occurred in 1999, including paint and plaster throughout, new lighting in the sanctuary, and the installation of central air and new windows throughout the building. Next slide. A really unique feature inside of this building is a 2nd floor, 2nd level baptismal. It was originally a mikvah, which was a cleansing pool for the Jewish congregation, and then Second Tabernacle converted its use to the baptismal. It's behind the drapes here in this photo, and then there I have a close-up in the next slide of the stained glass that was installed by the church with the Christian imagery to reflect the change in use of this space from mikvah to baptismal. Next slide, please. The lower level is used for a lot of programming within the church. This is a church that's quite active in the Union Miles neighborhood. They have a number of programs for youth, like Vacation Bible School, athletic programs, tutoring, and then they also have a number of food programs in which they open up this space to the community. There's kitchen and some small classroom and office spaces down there as well. So in conclusion, Cleveland Restoration Society believes that Second Tabernacle Baptist Church has been a good steward of the building. It's been their home for the past 65 years. And they also, continue to respond to needs within the community. The brick building retains much of its original architectural character when first constructed by the Jewish congregation, and also reflects the cultural heritage of the Baptist Church, specifically through those changes in the glass block crosses and the adaptation of the mikveh to the baptismal. The structure reflects the layered history of Cleveland and remains a tangible piece of both the Jewish and African American heritage here in our city. So that's our presentation, and I think we are happy to hear comments or questions.
Excellent. Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Move on to questions and comments from the commission. Questions or comments from the commission? I'll start us off. I think this is a really interesting building that has withstood the test of time to date, and I would support a nomination so that it continues to be respected and a anchor in the community. Mr. Brancatelli?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I concur. I drive by this building often. It's around the corner from where I live, and it's they've done a wonderful job of being able to retain its condition and beauty. So would support that as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also supportive of the nomination. I read over the research that was done on the building. Very, very fascinating. And I'm glad to see that the current owners want to continue its use and its vibrancy to the community, and is willing to make the investment to keep the building in good shape. So I totally applaud this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Are there questions and comments from the commission? All right. Other questions or comments? Ms. Johnson?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Stephanie Johnson, and I am the treasurer over at Second Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, and also a member. I've been a member of this church since childhood, and I actually was baptized in that baptismal pool. And I just wanted to comment and thank you, Madam Chairman, and the board for hearing from us today and taking in consideration the nomination.
Thank you for that feedback. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments from the commission? If not, I'm going to have Carl or Don double check I'm seeing it right. Would someone like to make a recommendation for the continuation of the nomination? Is that right, Don?
I like it. We just need a motion to nominate the building as Cleveland Landmark. But I like your language too.
You say it different every time. That's why I always stumble over it. Mr. Dreyer?
I will make that motion. I'm impressed by the condition of the building, especially the inside, which really reflects the historical design of it. And it's also nice to have a property owner that actually wants to be a landmark. So I will make that motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Tony. I would second that motion.
Thank you. For the second, any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and bear with me because I'm not sure who's still with us, but Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonesi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Colicchia, Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund,
Yes.
Director Wong, Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion to nominate passes unanimously.
Excellent. Congratulations. We look forward to the future of this facility. We'll move on to the next Cleveland Landmarks nomination, the Roman Baptist Church located at 1416 West 57th Street.
Thank you, Madam Chair. She mentioned this is at 1416 West 57th Street. This is located one parcel south of the Gordon Square Historic District. You can see here. As with all of Europe, there is an extensive history of moving borders and different empires and other forces that tell a very complex story of the nation of Romania, and I'm not going to go through all of it, promise. I just have to briefly note that the principalities of Transylvania, Moldavia, and Wallachia were formed in the 13th century as the first formal division of the Romanian population, and that these principalities were briefly reunited under Michael the Brave in 1600 before his defeat and assassination by the Turks and Habsburg forces. Transylvania was under direct rule of Hungary since 1867. Here we have the different timelines early to more of our current state of what we're doing with Romania. Wallachia, Moldavia, unified in 1859 and officially a union formally declared in 1861. It was still under the Ottoman Empire at the time. So as I was reading this, it was interesting to see that the Ottoman Empire recognized this union so long as Prince Kuza was still in power. Although there were the Kingdom of Romania became official in 1881, and there's other portions of that would eventually come in to form what we know as Romania today. In World War I, Romania joined on the side of the Triple Entente with the aim of regaining their lost lands. And as you can see by our timeline history, Bessarabia and Romania were unified in 1918 after the war, and then December 1st is Unification Day, and Romania was officially recognized via the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Trianon. It's having worked with a lot of different communities through Hungary and Austria, our different Romania and all these different cultures. It's been interesting to how much of this world history that Cleveland is actually connected to. And here's our boundaries of Romania today. Romanians were coming to America in the greatest migration from 1895 to 1914, and 85% of this coming from 3 distinct areas within the country. The migration proceeded along well-traveled courses to specific destinations, and this not only applies to Romania, but it was interesting looking that this was also applying to Italians and to Slovaks. And because they're coming from 85% in this wide variety, there's a broad cultural identity for Romanians. There was an estimated 120,000 Romanians coming to America, and that's partially because previously being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that when you see census records, you'll see Austria or Hungary, and it didn't really come into effect until later when they started talking about the mother tongue language question, which would make it more specific as to what portion of Europe they were coming from. The Transylvanian Saxons were typically the first to leave this area, and by 1891 there was a settlement in Cleveland large enough to support the Mutual Benefit Society, and we know that today as Saxonheim Hall. So they still have that present here. So that settlement actually attracted more people to come over, and so the Romanians were a later group to come over from others. It talked about solitary migration, which the Romanians, versus chain migrations, which the Italians did. They did chain migration. Multiple generations were coming over and from specific areas, and there was no regional separation. So those 85% coming from multiple. So that's why you have this diverse Romanian culture. They were primarily coming over to pay off their incurred debts and buy back land to go back to Romania. And there was a lot of that going back and forth prior to World War I. So the Romanians in Cleveland, the first Romanian Mutual Benefit Society is Carpentina. And that Carpentina Hall is still standing on West 58th Street. This Romanian settlement was on the west side of the city between West 45th and West 65th, which is also within an Irish settlement. So there was some going back and forth at the beginning, but they eventually coexisted. And this was also the location of the first Romanian parishes in America, St. Mary Orthodox and St. Helena. So this area that we're talking about is known as Little Romania. And you can see the extent of that. And you see on the right where our church is located within the larger community. The Romanian Baptist Church, organized in 1910. It's one of the earliest in the United States. The first one was done in Cincinnati at about the same time. And we had, our missionary was here in Cleveland, who was preaching to the Jewish members as well. And there were 6 members that started receiving their services in Romanian at a different church nearby. And then they came together and started to form this parish. The minister was also preaching in Akron, and he brought in another person, Mr. Fark, to assist in developing this, and so he wasn't spread out. Because you can imagine back in those days, the traveling between Cleveland and Akron was a lot longer than it takes today. Then the greatest was called to be the pastor of the Akron Romanian Baptist Church in 1914. So Fark took over the leadership of this congregation and grew. So a new church was planned. So Fark had congregations on both the east and west side of the city. You can see that the land to the church was obtained, was donated, but the construction was delayed due to the outbreak of World War I. The architect that designed this is John H. Graham. He designed many buildings in the greater Cleveland area, including out in Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, and the Film Exchange building, which is a designated Cleveland landmark as well. So once the church was completed, Fark was given full-time status as a missionary, and then later he was ordained as a minister. From what I was reading, it seems that Fark was actually doing all this as a volunteer up until he became the pastor. But then he was later called to be the pastor of the Romanian Baptist Church in Aurora, Illinois, and a new pastor was called who would be instrumental in our area. Danila Pascu, he was attending a conference in Atlanta in 1939 and was unable to return because of the war. He was then invited to become the pastor of the parish, and he began a Romanian radio hour ministry, which was important to getting news out about Europe and preaching to the local. And then his wife and 2 children arrived in Cleveland in 1941. After World War II, he was asked to go by the Baptist Association to go to Europe and investigate the plight of refugees. And his report was influential in creating the special funding to help out refugees. And he himself helped resettle hundreds of displaced immigrant families, not just Baptist, but others, and not just Romanian, but of other countries as well. He was called to testify by Congressman Michael Fegan from Ohio regarding the Immigration and Nationality Act, and his comments were especially for the family integration should be a top priority. And maybe that's from being separated from his family in part earlier, that getting families back together was a top priority for that stuff. So we have to take a quick step back to World War II. There was a lot of moving parts in the leadership of Romania in the decade before World War II, and it had become a military dictatorship under Ion Antonescu in 1940, and it was aligned with Nazi Germany. King Michael participated in a coup which ousted him and declared an armistice agreement with the Allies in 1944. And there are some experts that state that it was this coup and armistice that helped shorten the time of World War II by about 6 months or so. So it was important world events. In 1945, he was forced to appoint a pro-Soviet government, as it had become part of the Soviet Union, part of the Yalta Agreement. And then after 2 years, King Michael was forced to abdicate the throne and sent into exile. And although it would distance itself from Moscow after Stalin's death in 1953, Romania would be a communist dictatorship until 1989, when a national uprising ousted that government. King Michael visited Cleveland and visited the church in 1948. And while he was there, and I had to use my Google Translate for part of this, says King Michael in the church in Cleveland promises verbally and in writing, signing his commitment on the Bible from the pulpit of the church, that he will grant religious freedom to the Baptist believers in Romania if he returns to the throne of Romania. The congregation would continue to grow, primarily with new members arriving from Romania and through refugee camps. They would finally outgrow the West 57th location and started looking for a new property. Congregation purchased property in Parma. So this is one of the later leaving of the neighborhood. They stayed in the Detroit Shoreway area for a long time. And then in April of 1990, they had their new facility. The property was sold to Zion Pentecostal Church in 1989 and is transferred 3 times since then to different LLCs. The building meets criteria for landmark designation through its age, its integrity, and its significance. Staff was requested to begin the landmark designation by Councilwoman Jenny Spencer. And we see the different reasons for significance that this building contributes here. We have to say thank you to Heather Lazar from Councilwoman Spencer's office and David Jerka for their research assistance and some of the other information that where we got the sources. And I believe we have Mr. Jerka here to speak, and also Ms. Lazar as well, if they'd like to chime in here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Heather, would you like to go first?
Thank you, David. Thank you, members of the commission. It's been wonderful to work with Mr. Jerka and Landmarks on this designation. I realized in the process not only how important this building is to our history and a unique designation within our community, but how poor my world history knowledge is. So, Carl, thank you for walking us through all of that history. So the council office is fully supportive of designating this a Cleveland landmark, and we look forward to hearing all of your comments. So thank you for letting us be involved in this process. And now I defer to you, David.
Thank you so much for your support of this work. I'll briefly say that I was a member of the church from 1980 when I was born until 1989 when we moved to Parma. But I did return, and I'm currently a resident of Franklin Boulevard, which is about 2 blocks away from this home. And also my sister, her husband, and 6 kids live even closer to the church than I do. So we have fond memories of it and really value the Romanian history and culture, which is one of the things that brought us back to the neighborhood. I'll stop there and I'll also say that we have 2 other individuals that can briefly, relate their experience and support, including my dad, John Jerka, who immigrated here well before I was born. And then also Dan Pascu, who is the son of the pastor Danila Pascu, who was mentioned in the report. So I'll hand it off to my dad first and then maybe to Dan Pascu. Thank you. I think you're muted. Unmute, Dad.
Here we go. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am very glad to be part of this review discussion that we have here and to reminiscence of some of the old events that we had in this particular building. First of all, I came to the United States in 1965. First time I attended this church was on 4th of July, 1965, and coming to Cleveland to visit some friends. At that time, I was living in, just came from Florida for a while in West Virginia, and then here to Cleveland. And I just want to say that this was a place at that time that was very well kept and very important to the new immigrants, where they could meet each other and definitely develop and have their spiritual life developed. We thank especially to our pastor at that time, Danila Pascu, that was very instrumental on keeping the immigrants together, not only Romanians, but even other nationalities. And that's why he even used to have a very special annual concert here with musicians from various places in Cleveland, various established institutions being led by Professor Poinard from Baldwin Wallace University in Berea, where he used to get together, like I said, various good singers and special people from around Cleveland, churches and other locations, and had an annual concert here. I'm also very satisfied and very glad to see that many people still remember and are interested in the past history of various nationalities, like the Romanians in this case. So I very much support the idea of maintaining this building and keep it as safe as possible in the area. I just want to add that right next to the building, there's also another larger building, which is on corner of West 57 and Detroit, which actually housed the Romanian newspaper printing location. And for many years, that paper was printed at that location and distributed throughout the country. Thank you for the opportunity of talking to you here, and we hope that something good can be developed here, and in a way to maintain the roots and the traditions and even the history of Romanian Clevelanders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just realized my camera's off. Thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it. It was very thorough and very educational. And it's a wonderful facility. Did that conclude your presentation?
I think Dr. Pascu, if you would like to comment briefly. Thank you. We can't hear you. You're muted. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Can't hear you yet. I know he's joining us from out of town as well, so just wanted to have a moment. No, can't hear it. Sorry. Well, maybe if you're able to get it to join and we hear your voice, then we can pause and take your comments. But Madam Chair, maybe you can continue in the meantime.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
I would just like to open up the floor to the commission for questions and comments on the nomination. Mr. Brancatelli?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a very wonderful history that was presented, and fully support this nomination. And I learned a little more even on the Romanian Daily News, that beautiful corner building that housed that publication. So very supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brancatelli. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, when I lived in the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood, I was always curious about this this beautiful little church. So I really appreciate all of the research that has been done and the detailed presentation. A few weeks ago, I saw this building was listed for sale on Zillow. I don't think it's like formally on the market. So I was just curious if anybody knows of any plans for the future of this building. So that's my question and my comments.
Would the applicant like to comment on that?
Actually, Madam Chair,
Oh, sorry.
part of the reason we were approached about designating this is that the councilwoman wanted to make sure that any future development, that this was not lost to that. So this is a protective step from the councilwoman.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Carl.
I agree. I think this is very, very appropriate for this building. It is a little gem that is hidden, but has maintained much of its integrity, and I would support the nomination so that it continues to. Other questions or comments from the commission? Would someone like to put forward a motion?
Hi, Madam Chair. This is Tony. I would move that this be approved.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a second. Any further discussion? Before I move on, I just want to conclude it as the applicant, or I'm sorry, not the applicant, but the representatives from on the history was your additional person able to get their mic unmuted, or can we move forward and just move forward with the nomination?
I'm not sure if the audio works, but I'll just say briefly that Dr. Pascu himself is an individual of note who is a member of the church for some time. In fact, he's a kind of notable astronomer who discovered Calypso and Janus, two moons of Saturn. So I'm sure that he would also share his support and perhaps some of the anecdotes from his time while a member of the church. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a very impressive, history and, people that are involved in this church. So with that, then we have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Great. Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonesi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Edmund, Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to this, continuing the process.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, do we happen to know if the Romanian Press Building at 5701 Detroit is landmarked?
I do not personally. Don or Carl, can you respond to that?
It's located within the Gordon Square Historic District, so it is not individually landmarked, but it is within district.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. So that concludes our Cleveland Landmark nominations, or we'll move on to National Registration of Historic Place nominations. Carl?
It's my turn this time.
Oh, Don?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have two nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. In our role as a certified local government, we are given the opportunity to comment. These will both be heard at the Ohio Historic Site Preservation Advisory Board on June 17th. I will be very brief. I hope you all had a chance to review them. The nominations are extensive and also very well researched and written. The first one is the Roush and Lang Carriage Company building on West 25th Street. It was nominated under Criterion A for its association with broad patterns of local history in the area of industry, for its contributions to Cleveland's carriage building industry in the second half of the 19th century, automobile industry in the early 20th century,
Hello.
and the company's role in the emerging materials handling industry in the first half of the 20th century. It was founded in 1853 by Jacob Roush. His son Charles expanded the business into carriage making in the early 1870s, and it blossomed into a premier carriage and wagon maker company. Their broad product line of luxury personal carriages and commercial wagons established the company's reputation for quality in Ohio and beyond. The company transitioned into automobile manufacturing in 1905, producing expensive Roush and Lang electrics for 15 years, one of only a few electric car companies in America to reach that longevity milestone. It later merged with the Baker Company. Baker R&L and Baker Rao Lang built automobile bodies for many well-known manufacturers of gasoline-powered autos, including Ford's iconic Woody station wagons, and they later introduced small electric industrial tractors and trucks for factory and warehouse use. The period of significance is from 1878 to 1947. It's also significant for its architecture, its methods of construction. The notable architects of the complex are Andrew Mittermeier and the Osborne Engineering Company. It maintains a significant level of integrity for a building that evolved and grew over more than 50 years. It's still largely intact. You can see some of the products that the company produced. A couple of them are actually in the Western Reserve Historical Society collection. I think it's a highly significant industrial building. I wasn't aware of their place in Cleveland's automobile history until I read this nomination. And I think it's a good nomination, and I think it's eligible for the National Register.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. That's very intriguing. I wasn't aware of the history either. Open up the floor to the commission for questions and comments. Oops, sorry. I believe I've scrolled down and seen. There you go. Questions and comments from the commission? . I'll start us off. I mean, I think this is a great building. It has obviously such a deep history that many of us were not aware of. So I would support, the nomination. Other feedback from the commission? Mr. Bonazzi?
We're slowly losing members. No, I would 100% support this building. Because of its placement in the city, just it's a very substantial, important geographical location, but then on top of that, just the immense history attached to that building. I did not know all that history. I always love when these registers come to before the commission because I get to learn so much more about Cleveland every time this happens. So I'm very much in support of this building.
Thank you, Mr. Bonazzi. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also very much in support of the nomination of this building. Cleveland has a really rich, deep history in automobile manufacturing, and there's quite a number of buildings like this, including several electric car makers in this city in the early 20th century. So this is a fascinating presentation, and I'm glad to see that we're celebrating this piece of Cleveland's history and in the automotive industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Other feedback from the commission? Or would someone like to make a motion?
This is Tony. I would make a motion to support the nomination.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Jonathan. I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Pettit, please call roll and announce the results.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bonazzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasek,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll turn this back over. Is it Don still, or is it Carl this time?
It's still me.
All right.
The second nomination is the Sideway Suspension Bridge, which is located over Kingsbury Run. It connects Sideway Avenue to East 67th Street. For a lot of people, it's always been just a tantalizing rumor. It hasn't been used in a long time. It was built in 1930 by the Nickel Plate Railroad to bridge Kingsbury Run. It's being nominated for its architecture and for its contribution to the broad patterns of history. It's one of the few remaining examples of the American method of steel cable suspension bridges used on a pedestrian bridge. It uses Roebling style main steel cables, the same method used in the Brooklyn Bridge. It's Cleveland's and Ohio's only pedestrian suspension bridge documented by the Historic American Engineering Record. It's also significant for its contribution to broad patterns of history in the areas of ethnic heritage and social history. It was built to connect two neighborhoods on the southeast side of Cleveland, and it tells a story about that's relevant to civil rights, school and housing segregation, and engineering development. It connects two neighborhoods that experienced racial tensions between Polish working class white families in the Jakova neighborhood and Black families residing in public housing in the Garden Valley neighborhood to the north. The bridge was set fire to during the July 1966 Huff riots. It was decommissioned at that time by the city, and it remains a lasting physical symbol of racial malaise and it's associated with the theme of racial desegregation in housing and public education in Cleveland and the United States. You can see some of the image of it. The black and white photos were the historic views of the bridge. It's significantly deteriorated because of its disuse over a long period of time, but it still retains much of its integrity. And I believe it's being proposed for the National Register by Bell Burton Carr. There's a desire to explore its use as an amenity on a multi-use trail system. It would be wonderful to restore it, to connect the two neighborhoods again, and to restore its significance as a suspension bridge. I think that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
All right. Questions and comments from the commission? Ms. Anderson?
Thank you. Is there any funding available to stabilize and eventually restore this bridge, or is this nomination part of a whole project to try to get some funding and to make this an active amenity again?
I'm not aware of any funding at the moment. I think this is really just the first step to establish its significance, put it on the National Register. That might make it eligible for historic tax credits. That would remain to be seen depending on the project here. I think it's just the first step to move forward with exploring its eventual restoration. There has been some talk about nominating it as Cleveland Landmark. That still has to come before this commission. It was nominated a few decades ago, but never moved forward. The city is the current owner of the structure, so we would need the consent of the city, and also, the city, I think, would be instrumental in providing funding for any kind of restoration.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Don. Thank you for the questions. Anderson, Mr. Brancatelli?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a long history with this bridge, back to when I was a director of the CDC in the St. Hyacinth neighborhood. We actually had assembled land on the west side of this bridge by Francis Avenue to help open up and preserve that landing point. There were some old industrial buildings, and it's quite overgrown now. Every once in a while when we do our neighborhood survey, we'll may see a deer or turkey or fox or some other wildlife animal around that side of the bridge. I would like to echo a little bit what Michelle had talked about, a concern about having resources to study the integrity of the bridge. We had looked at this bridge. This was a project that Bobby Richtel had looked at years and years ago, as was pointed out earlier by Don, that we had looked at nominating this and preserving this bridge and restoring this bridge because of its history, both in social as well as economic. There were a significant number of industrial and auto plants on the west side of this bridge, engine plants, et cetera, for the automobiles. So it was a well-used bridge for getting employees across the Kinsbury line. And then, of course, a lot of the history of the Kinsbury Round and the Kinsbury Torso, et cetera, along this side. But a fascinating history, and certainly well worth trying to understand how we could preserve this and potentially open this back up as a major connector to our communities would be very welcome.
Thank you for that feedback, Mr. Brancatelli. I mean, I never knew this bridge existed, so and this is just fascinating to me that I never knew it existed, and it's just such a gem to have in our community that I think it's a great architectural, structure in itself, but then the history makes it even more valuable. So I would support, the nomination. Ms. Anderson, did you have additional comments?
Real quick question. I don't know if there's any association with this bridge and the Kingsbury Run murders. It might be a fundraising tool. There's a lot of people who are very interested in that. And there's several interesting books on that. The Torso murders back in the 30s. So I don't know if anybody is aware of that or not.
Yeah, there was no relationship between the bridge and the Torso murders. It just happened to be under the underpass, up and down the Kingsbury Run, that they found numerous bodies. But it does have that linkage of the connection of being in that area.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the commission? Or would someone like to make a motion?
I would make a motion to for the nomination.
Thank you for the motion. Do we have a second? We only have a few of us here, so we need somebody to make it.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? All right, Mr. Pettit, please call roll.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Benezzi,
Yes.
Mr. Brancatelli,
Yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion to nominate passes unanimously. Well, let me restate that. The motion to recommend approval by the State Preservation Board passes unanimously. We're not nominating it today. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our nominations portion. Administrative reports.
I just want to remind the commission that we have a special meeting on June 3rd with the Planning Commission to take final action on the Sherwin-Williams headquarter project. And the chairwoman won't be with us, but hopefully all of you can make it. I believe the agendas went out yesterday. The presentation will soon be available as well, but we're just acting on the outstanding issues next week. And that's all I've got, unless anyone else has anything.
I do not have anything. Does anyone else? No? All right, then we will then conclude our meeting and adjourn, and everyone have a great holiday weekend.
Perfect.
You too.
Thank you too.
Have a good holiday, everyone.
Take care.